Hello guys, welcome to Eclipse Wizardry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Daphne and Astoria Greengrass sisters kissed Harry age 7 and Slytherin blood magic forced them share one soulmate? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Greenhouse and the Kiss. The thing about Diagon Alley was that it smelled like possibility and burnt sugar and something faintly sulfurous that nobody ever talked about, and Harry Potter had been standing in the middle of it for approximately 11 minutes before he got lost. Not lost in a frightening way, or at least, he was trying very hard to tell himself it wasn't frightening, because being frightened was the sort of thing that made Uncle Vernon's face go that particular shade of plum that preceded bad things. But Uncle Vernon wasn't here. Nobody from Privet Drive was here, because 3 hours ago a very tall man with hands like dinner plates had taken Harry through a brick wall in the back of a pub, and the world had cracked open like an egg, and everything inside it had been gold. He'd been given a handful of coins, for ice cream, if you like, the tall man had said, and then immediately gotten distracted by someone selling self-stirring cauldrons, which was apparently enormously funny for reasons Harry didn't understand, and told to stay near the fountain. Harry had stayed near the fountain for a good 4 minutes before a boy his age had knocked into him at a dead sprint, and the resulting collision had sent Harry 3 steps to the left, and then a woman with a tower of packages had pushed past him, and then he'd walked another 10 feet trying to get back to the fountain and had instead ended up in a narrow alley between 2 buildings that smelled strongly of earth and green things. He was 7 years old. He had 11 nuts, 2 sickles, and a growing suspicion that the wizarding world was significantly more chaotic than anyone had told him. The alley opened into a small courtyard, more of a pocket really, tucked between the main street and the back of what appeared to be a potion supply shop, and the entire space had been claimed by plants. Not a garden, exactly. More like a garden had staged a very successful coup. Tall glass panels formed a makeshift greenhouse along one wall, and inside it, things grew that had no business growing anywhere near London. Something with purple leaves that turned to watch him. Something that appeared to be humming. And 2 girls, crouched over a clay pot near the greenhouse door, engaged in what sounded like a serious argument conducted in theatrical whispers. "It's your dare," the older one said. She was maybe 9, with pale blonde hair pulled back tightly and the expression of someone who was accustomed to being right. "You said you'd do it." "I said I'd consider doing it," said the younger one. She was closer to Harry's age, 7, maybe, with the same blonde hair worn loose, and she was currently holding a small trowel like she might use it as a weapon if necessary. "There's a difference. Astoria. Daphne. If you don't do it, you have to clean out the venomous tentacula pot for a month." "That's not," the younger girl, Astoria, turned around, apparently looking for something to argue at, and found Harry standing 6 feet away instead. She stared at him. He stared back. He became aware that he was still holding his 11 nuts very tightly in his left hand. "Hello," Astoria said, in the tone of someone who had just been handed a perfect solution to an inconvenient problem. "Hello," said Harry. The older girl, Daphne, turned around too. Her eyes were very blue and they assessed him in about 3 seconds flat in the way that adults sometimes did, the kind of look that sorted and filed and concluded. He'd gotten that look from teachers before. He hadn't expected it from a 9-year-old. "You're not supposed to be back here," Daphne said. Not unkindly. Just factually. "I know," Harry said. "I got lost." "From where?" "The fountain." The tall man got distracted. Daphne looked at him for another moment. "Hagrid," she said. "I don't actually know his name," Harry admitted. Something shifted in Daphne's expression, not quite softening, more like a recalibration. She looked at his hand, at the nuts he was holding. Then at his face. Then, with the careful economy of someone who had been raised to notice things, at the hair that didn't lie flat and the clothes that were slightly too large and the way he was standing, perfectly still, perfectly contained, in the middle of a strange place with no one around. She filed all of it away somewhere, and he could almost see her do it. "You're a muggle-raised first-timer," she said. Not an accusation. Just a conclusion. I only found out I was a wizard this morning, Harry said. Astoria's eyes went very wide. Only this morning? What did you think before? Did you think you were normal? Astoria, Daphne said. It's a genuine question. It's rude. I didn't think it was rude, Harry said, because it hadn't been. She'd asked it the same way she'd said hello, open and curious and completely without the edge that adults put on the same question, that edge that meant how sad, how strange, what a pity. And yes. I thought I was normal. Mostly. Mostly? Things happened sometimes. Around me. He paused. The teachers at my school used to get very upset about it. Astoria grinned. She had a gap between her front teeth. What kind of things? A teacher cut my hair once and it grew back by the next morning. And once I ended up on the school roof when some boys were chasing me. He said it plainly, not for effect, and Astoria laughed, a bright, genuine, delighted sound that seemed slightly too large for her. That's brilliant, she said. Astoria, Daphne said again, but this time she was fighting a smile and losing in the corners of her mouth. Harry looked at the greenhouse behind them. Through the glass panels, he could see the humming plant more clearly. It appeared to be some sort of vine, pale gold, with tiny flowers that opened and closed in a rhythm that was almost but not quite like breathing. What's that one? He said, nodding toward it. Both girls turned to look, and there was a simultaneous shift in their posture, a pride and comfort that came from being asked about something they actually knew. Harry noticed that too. Orasong vine, Daphne said. It hums at specific magical frequencies. Mother uses it in diagnostic potions. She paused. You shouldn't touch it. It reacts to unfamiliar magic and it can be. She considered the word. Emphatic. What does emphatic mean when a plant does it? Loud, Astoria said cheerfully. And also slightly on fire. Our family grows rare potions ingredients, Daphne explained. We have a small stall here on the weekends. Father's inside negotiating a sale, which is why we're out here, and we're supposed to be repotting the moondew seedlings, but instead we're arguing about a dare, Astoria said. We are not arguing about a dare anymore. We were, though. Right up until he showed up. Astoria was looking at Harry with an expression that he would spend years learning to read, that particular combination of calculating mischief and genuine warmth that was entirely, irreducibly Astoria Greengrass. What's your name? Harry. Harry what? He hesitated. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because this morning the tall man had said his name and everyone in the pub had reacted like he'd said something enormous, and Harry was still deciding how he felt about being something enormous. Potter, he said. Harry Potter. Astoria blinked. Daphne went very still. It was the kind of stillness that wasn't shocked so much as deeply careful, the way you go still when you're carrying something fragile and someone startles you and you don't move until you're sure you haven't dropped it. Harry Potter, Daphne repeated. Yes. The Harry Potter. I've gathered I'm supposed to know what that means, Harry said, but I only found out this morning, so I'm still catching up. Another one of those long looks from Daphne. Then, very quietly, your parents were Lily and James Potter. Yes. And you've been living with Muggles. He kept his voice level. He'd had years of practice at keeping his voice level. My aunt and uncle. Daphne pressed her lips together. Astoria was watching Harry with an expression that had lost its mischief and become something more attentive, more careful, the look of a child who has picked up, through proximity to clever older people, the habit of understanding what isn't being said. I'm Daphne Greengrass, the older girl said finally. This is my sister Astoria. Our family we're an old wizarding family. Ancient house. She said it the way you'd report a fact, not the way you'd announce a status. You would have heard of us eventually. Probably, Harry agreed. There was a pause that should have been awkward and somehow wasn't. The orasong vine hummed. Something inside the greenhouse rustled. Astoria had started spinning the trowel in her fingers like a small, dirt-covered baton. "The dare," Astoria said suddenly, with the air of someone who has just had a completely natural and reasonable idea, "was that I had to kiss a stranger on the cheek." "Astoria, he's a stranger. He's Harry Potter." "He's both," Astoria said reasonably. She looked at Harry. "Would you mind? It's just the cheek. I'll lose a month of tentacula duty if I don't, and the tentacula has been in a terrible mood." Harry blinked. No one had ever asked him something quite like that before. The novelty of it, of being asked, of someone wanting something from him that was small and strange and cheerful rather than chores or silence or invisibility, caught him slightly off guard. "All right," he said. Astoria stood up, crossed to him, and kissed him on the left cheek. It was quick, childish, the kind of thing that would be entirely unremarkable, and she was already pulling back and turning to look triumphantly at her sister when Daphne made a sound Harry had never heard before, not quite a word, more like the sound of a decision being made, and stepped forward and kissed his right cheek. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then the world exploded. Not loudly. That was the strange thing about it, there was no bang, no flash, no dramatic crack of thunder. What happened was quieter and more fundamental than that. It was as though something deep in the air tightened, the way a rope pulls taut, and then there was a sensation like warmth running from Harry's cheeks down through his chest and into his bones, and the orasong vine behind the glass screamed. Not metaphorically. It screamed, a sharp, sustained, crystalline note that vibrated the glass panels and sent every bird within earshot launching off every rooftop simultaneously. Astoria stumbled backward. Daphne pressed both hands over her mouth, staring at Harry with an expression he would later recognize as the face she made when she had made a serious tactical error. Harry looked at his hands. They were glowing. Not brightly, it was more like the light inside a coal when you blow on it, deep amber and shifting, and the glow was fading even as he watched, pulling back into his skin like water draining. He felt different. Not bad different. But different, like something had been rearranged slightly inside him, a piece of furniture moved 2 inches to the left. "Daphne," Astoria said. Her voice had gone very small. "Daph. I know. Did we, I know, Tori. What's happening?" Harry said. Daphne looked at him. Her composure was extraordinary for a 9-year-old, she was clearly frightened, but the fright had been immediately organized into something functional. "There's a contract in our family grimoire," she said. "A blood magic ward. It's very old, our great-grandmother wrote it as a protection for the Greengrass heir. If a Greengrass girl kisses her soulmate before age 17, the magic recognizes the bond and seals it." She stopped. "It's only ever triggered once, for one heir. Never twice in the same generation. Never," she stopped again. "Never for 2 of us at once," Astoria finished, barely above a whisper. Harry processed this. He was 7 and he had grown up in a house where no one explained anything to him, so he had gotten very good at working with incomplete information. "So the magic chose me," he said slowly, "as, what, a soulmate, for both of you." "It shouldn't be possible," Daphne said. "But it happened." "Yes. So it's possible." She opened her mouth, closed it, and then, in spite of everything, in spite of the vine that was still vibrating against its glass panels and the glow that was only just fading from Harry's skin, something that might have been a very reluctant, very tiny laugh escaped her. "Yes," she said. "It's possible. Apparently." The greenhouse door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of face that had been handsome for a long time and knew it. He was wearing robes that Harry would later learn to identify as expensive, and he was carrying a clipboard that he lowered very slowly as he took in the scene, the vibrating glass, the humming plant, his 2 daughters standing either side of a boy he didn't recognize, all 3 of them with the particular look of children who have done something that cannot be undone. Cyrus Greengrass had been a Slytherin. He had been educated in blood magic, politics, and patience. He looked at the 3 children for a long, measured moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Which ward?" Not a question. Daphne straightened. She had clearly inherited this from him, that same quality of being frightened and completely composed at the same time. "The Soulmate Accord," she said. "The Greengrass Accord." Cyrus Greengrass closed his eyes. He stood like that for approximately 3 seconds, which was, Harry would later come to understand, the equivalent of another man sitting down on the floor. "Both of you," he said. Still quiet. "Yes, father." "And him?" "Harry Potter, father." Cyrus opened his eyes and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. He'd had years of practice at being looked at by adults who were deciding what he was, and he'd gotten good at meeting those looks straight on without flinching, because flinching gave them something. Whatever Cyrus Greengrass was looking for, Harry wasn't sure he found it. Or perhaps he found too much of it. The man's expression shifted through something complicated, recognition, calculation, and beneath both of those, something that was quietly not uncaring, and then he looked at the orasong vine, still faintly humming its alarm, and he said, "Come inside." It was not quite an invitation. It was the kind of thing you said when the alternative was worse. Harry followed the Greengrass family inside. The interior of their stall was larger than the exterior suggested, magically expanded, obviously, though Harry didn't know the word for that yet. Long work tables ran along both walls, covered in the careful organized chaos of someone who worked with living things, clay pots, pruning tools, neatly labeled glass files, stacks of botanical notebooks with cracked spines. The air smelled of damp earth and something sweet and metallic that Harry couldn't identify. A woman looked up from one of the work tables. She had Daphne's eyes and Astoria's mouth and the composed, precise energy of someone who was very good at their work and knew it. She took in her husband's face, then her daughter's, then Harry, then the specific quality of the silence that had followed them inside. "Cyrus," she said. "The accord activated," he said. The woman, Astoria Greengrass, Harry learned her name within the next 30 seconds, set down the file she was holding with the careful deliberateness of someone who knew that if they didn't, they might drop it. "Both girls," she said. "Yes." "And the third party?" "Harry Potter." There was a silence that Harry felt rather than heard, a specific, pressurized quiet that happened when people were communicating without words in a way he hadn't been included in. He had learned to read that kind of silence at Privet Drive, where so much had been communicated in looks and pauses and the angle of someone's shoulders. This was different, not aimed at him, not excluding him, but moving too fast for him to follow. "Sit down," Isadora said, looking at Harry directly for the first time. Her voice was level and not unkind. "All 3 of you." They sat on a bench near the wall, Daphne to Harry's left, Astoria to his right, both of them with the particular posture of children waiting for a consequence they don't yet know the shape of. Cyrus placed the clipboard on the table and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "In order." Astoria told it. Daphne added corrections twice. Harry filled in his own part. "I got lost from the fountain, I came through the alley," without elaboration. Cyrus listened without interrupting. Isadora had moved to a large cabinet on the far wall and was extracting a book, thick, leather-covered, clearly ancient, with a clasp that opened not with a key but with a small bloom of blood from Isadora's thumb. The Greengrass Grimoire. It hit the table with the weight of several generations. Isadora opened it to a page marked with a dried sprig of something silver, and Harry watched her read, and he watched her face change as she read, and it told him things. "The triad provision," she said finally. "I didn't know there was a triad provision," Cyrus said. "It's in the supplementary annotations." Elspeth Greengrass, 1692. Isadora looked up. She wrote it as a theoretical contingency. If the ward ever triggered for two heirs simultaneously, it would mean the bond had recognized a soul of sufficient, she uses the word depth. A soul deep enough to hold two separate Greengrass bonds without the magic fracturing. She paused. She wrote that if it happened, the result would be a single shared bond. A triad. Something that hadn't existed since the old magic, Cyrus said. Since before the Statute of Secrecy. Before the Blood Wars. Isadora looked at Harry with an expression he couldn't entirely read. He had the impression she was seeing something in him she hadn't expected to find in a boy who'd spent this morning thinking he was ordinary. It cannot be broken, she said, and she said it carefully, with the weight of information that needed to land properly. The Greengrass Accord, once triggered, is permanent. The triad version, even more so. Attempting to sever it would be catastrophic, Cyrus said, for all three parties. Harry thought about this. He looked at his hands, still faintly warm, he could still feel it, that slight rearrangement inside him, like a door had been opened somewhere. What does it actually do? He asked. Both parents looked at him. Daphne looked at him. Even Astoria, who had been vibrating with barely suppressed energy since they sat down, went still and looked at him. He hadn't asked it nervously. He'd asked it the way he asked everything, straight, practical, because information was always more useful than the absence of it. Cyrus uncrossed his arms. Over time, he said, a great deal. Immediately, he glanced at the grimoire. An awareness. A sense of the other's general state. Not thoughts. More like, weather. You'll know if one of us is in serious distress, Daphne said quietly. She was looking at the table. Without being told. You'll feel it. And vice versa, Astoria said. She said it with that same open curiosity she'd used for everything else, but there was something careful underneath it now, the same something that had made her voice go small outside. She was 7 and she was figuring out what it meant to be tied to someone. Harry thought about Privet Drive. About the cupboard under the stairs. About what it would have meant, on the worst nights in there, to have someone feel it. He didn't say any of that. All right, he said. Cyrus blinked. All right, he repeated. It can't be undone, Harry said. You've said that. So all right. He looked at both girls, at Daphne, who was watching him with the expression she'd been wearing since the beginning, that quiet ongoing assessment, and at Astoria, who was now watching him with something that was almost startled. I don't mind, he said. If that's what you were trying to figure out. There was a pause. You don't, Daphne started. Mind, no. He shrugged. It was a small, genuine shrug. I didn't have anyone before today. Now apparently I have, he gestured vaguely at the two of them, a bond, and 2 people who know about the Orasong vine. That seems like an improvement. Astoria laughed. It was the same laugh as before, too big for her, full of light, and this time Daphne didn't say her name. She just looked at Harry for a long moment, and then she looked away, and Harry thought he understood what she was thinking, because he was starting to learn the shape of how she thought. She had made a decision, back there outside, when she had stepped forward and kissed his cheek. She had done it on instinct and she was not the kind of person who trusted her instincts, and now the instinct had turned out to be something permanent and ancient and enormous, and she was deciding whether she was angry about it or not. She decided not. He could see it happen. You'll need to understand what this means going forward, Cyrus said. He had been watching Harry with the same quality of attention his daughter had, and he reached a conclusion at around the same moment. The bond will develop. The 3 of you will have advantages that most wizards spend careers trying to acquire artificially, a direct attunement to each other's magic, an amplification effect when you work together, instincts about each other that border on, father, Daphne said. Precognitive, he finished. But the wizarding world will have reactions. Because it's old magic, Harry said. Because it's Slytherin old magic, Isadora said, and something in her voice told him that was different. The Greengrass Accord descends from a ward pattern that predates the four founders, but it was formalized using Salazar Slytherin's blood contract methodology in the early Middle Ages. There are people in our world who would consider the activation of this bond, particularly in this configuration, deeply threatening. Harry thought about the way people in the pub had looked at him when Hagrid said his name. The strange reverence and the weight of expectation and what sat under both of those things, which was years and years of a war he had apparently ended. Because of who I am, he said. Yes, Cyrus said. Harry Potter in a Slytherin blood bond. Harry turned it over in his mind. The people who supported Voldemort would hate that because I'm supposed to be theirs, light side, pure symbols, all of that. And the light side would hate it because the Greengrasses are considered grey-aligned at best, Daphne said flatly. Because we didn't choose sides in the war. Because old blood magic makes people nervous. Because, she stopped. Because everything, Astoria said, with the cheerfulness of someone who has decided the mess is too large to be upset about. Yes, Daphne said. Because everything. Harry nodded slowly. He had already done the rough arithmetic and reached the obvious conclusion, which was that this was complicated and probably going to get more complicated, and there was nothing to do about that except be ready. He was 7. He had been managing complicated and lonely for 7 years. At least now the complicated had company. Cyrus and Isadora were having a conversation with their eyes across the top of his head. Harry let them have it. He had gotten very good at being patient while adults decided things. You're here with Hagrid, Cyrus said finally. To get your school things. I think so. He was going to take me to Gringotts. Yes. Cyrus straightened. Here is what we are going to do. Isadora will send a message to Hagrid. I imagine he's realized by now he's lost you and he's circling the fountain in a panic. The edge of something dry in his voice. You'll finish your errands. You'll get what you need. He paused. And then there is the question of where you go after that. Harry waited. The bond needs time, Isadora said. It needs the three of you in proximity for the first few months, while it settles. If you separate entirely, go back to a Muggle environment, without any contact, the magic will strain, Daphne said. Not looking at Harry. Looking at the table. Her hands, folded in her lap, were completely still. And it won't be comfortable. For any of us, Astoria added, and there was something in her voice now, a small, honest confession, that made her sound exactly her age. Harry thought about the cupboard. He thought about the particular quality of silence there, after the door was locked, how he'd gotten so used to it that the absence of noise had started to feel like a presence of its own. He thought about going back there, after this, after the Orasong vine and the grimoire and the amber light fading from his hands and 2 girls who had kissed his cheeks and accidentally bound themselves to him forever. Could I stay, he said. With your family. Until school starts. Cyrus and Isadora looked at each other. Yes, Isadora said. She said it the way she'd said everything, level, certain, without unnecessary softening or hardening. We'll speak with your guardians. There are legal instruments that can, they won't argue, Harry said. A beat. The Dursleys, he said. My aunt and uncle. They won't argue. They'll be relieved. He kept his voice completely flat and plain, the way he always kept it when he talked about Privet Drive, because flatness and plainness were armor and he was good at wearing them. They'd probably pay you to take me. Daphne looked at him. Not with pity. Pity was the thing he hated most about the way people looked at him when they found out about the scar, but with something that was quiet and direct and took him in completely. The way you look at something you're going to remember. Then that's settled, Cyrus said, in the voice of a man who had made his decision and was not going to revisit it. Astoria immediately began talking about which room Harry should have. She had clearly been redesigning the entire guest wing in her head for the last 4 minutes, and Daphne told her to stop being excessive, and Harry listened to the two of them argue about it with the easy, practiced rhythm of sisters who had been doing this their whole lives, and something inside him, something that had been braced for a very long time, cautiously, incrementally, began to unknot. Hagrid found him 40 minutes later, pink-faced with worry, the moment Harry stepped back onto the main street of Diagon Alley, flanked by 2 blonde girls and followed at a measured distance by a composed dark-haired man and a woman carrying the grimoire like it was simply something she happened to own. Harry. Blimey, I've been, hooer. Hagrid's eyes swept the group, landed on Cyrus Greengrass, and performed a complicated recalibration. Mr. Greengrass, he said, with the specific tone of someone who recognized the name. Rubius, Cyrus said pleasantly. I believe we have something to discuss. Hagrid looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hagrid. Harry had 11 nuts, 2 sickles, and a bond sealed in Slytherin blood magic, and for the first time in his life he had people at his back without having asked for them, and the day was still bright and the street still smelled of possibility and burnt sugar and whatever that faint sulphurous thing was. I got a bit lost, Harry said, but it worked out. Hagrid stared at him for a long moment. Then, because Hagrid was fundamentally incapable of remaining alarmed when something had clearly sorted itself, he laughed, that enormous, window-rattling laugh, and reached into his coat for the folded letter he'd been clutching since they'd parted, and shook his head. Well, he said. Dumbledore's gonna have something to say about this, I reckon. Several things, Cyrus agreed, still pleasantly. Daphne, at Harry's left shoulder, made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. Astoria had already grabbed Harry's wrist to pull him toward the bookshop, and he let himself be pulled, because she was warm and certain and the afternoon was long and there were apparently quite a lot of things a wizard needed before September. Behind them, Cyrus Greengrass looked at the pale scar on the back of Harry's neck, the one that nobody at Privet Drive had ever noticed, because nobody at Privet Drive had ever looked, and thought about ancient magic and modern politics and the particular way some things fell into place like they'd been waiting. He didn't say any of it. But he remembered it. That night, in a spare room at the Leaky Cauldron, the actual sleeping arrangements at Greengrass Manor would be sorted tomorrow, Isadora had said, with the efficiency of someone already composing the logistics. Harry lay on his back in the dark and thought about the day. He thought about the wall opening in the pub, and the gold. He thought about the Orasong vine screaming. He thought about Daphne's face when she'd looked at him, really looked, the 3rd or 4th time, after she'd stopped trying to classify what she was seeing and just let herself see it. He thought about Astoria's laugh. He pressed his left hand to his sternum, where the warmth had settled. It was still there, quieter now, deep in the bone, like an ember banked for the night. He could feel, very faintly, 2 other versions of it. Not thoughts. Not words. Just, weather. The way Cyrus had said. Astoria's was bright. Something between content and fizzing, like a shaken bottle left to settle. Daphne's was, he tried to find the word for it. Careful, he decided. It was the way you feel when you're carrying something you didn't expect to be given and you don't want to drop it. He understood that. He breathed out slowly in the dark. All right, he said to no one, quietly. 2 floors away, a 9-year-old girl in her own room sat at a small desk and opened the notebook she used for things she needed to think through, and wrote 2 words at the top of a clean page, and then sat looking at them for a long time. Harry Potter. She didn't write anything else. She closed the notebook and went to sleep, and if she dreamed, the dreams were warm and amber-colored and she didn't mention them to anyone. Chapter 2, The Grimoire Speaks. Greengrass Manor sat in the Cotswolds like it had grown there, which in a sense it had. The foundation stones had been laid in 1387 and the building had been adding to itself ever since, accumulating wings and annexes and a conservatory that definitely hadn't been in the original plans and a library that occupied what should have been 3 bedrooms and showed no remorse about it. The grounds ran to 12 acres of managed woodland and 4 a formal garden, and the whole thing was wrapped in enough protective enchantments that standing at the boundary felt like pressing your palm against warm glass. Harry stood at that boundary on his first morning, having woken before anyone else, and pressed his palm against nothing at all and felt it anyway. The magic recognized him. That was the strange part, not that there was a boundary, because he was learning quickly that the wizarding world ran on invisible lines and careful demarcations, but that crossing it felt like something. Not resistance. More like acknowledgement. Like a door that opened just slightly before you touched it. He'd been here 4 days. 4 days since Diagon Alley. 4 days since Hagrid had sat down with Cyrus Greengrass in the back of the leaky cauldron and they'd had a long, careful conversation that Harry had not been included in, and which had ended with Hagrid producing a crumpled envelope, Cyrus writing 3 lines on a piece of parchment, and both men standing and shaking hands with the particular gravity of people who have reached an agreement they intend to keep. Hagrid had ruffled Harry's hair before he left, an enormous, startling, warm gesture, and said, "You're gonna be all right, Harry," with such total conviction that Harry had believed him on instinct. 3 days since they'd gone to Privet Drive. Harry didn't think about that too much. He thought about it the way you think about a tooth you've had pulled, acknowledging that the gap is there, that it had been sore, moving on. Isadora had spoken to Petunia Desley in the front hallway while Cyrus waited outside and Harry went upstairs to the cupboard, his cupboard, technically, though he'd had the small bedroom for 2 months now since Dudley's second bedroom had gotten too full of things, and packed what he owned into a pillowcase, which was practical because a pillowcase was the largest container he had and also because it took approximately 4 minutes. He hadn't said goodbye to anyone. There wasn't anyone to say goodbye to. When he came back downstairs, Petunia had been signing something on a clipboard that Isadora was holding, and the expression on his aunt's face had been the one she wore when she was relieved and trying not to show it. Harry had looked at her and she had not looked back, and he had decided then to be done with that particular story. It was a small, clean decision, and he made it the same way he made most of his decisions, quickly, practically, without dwelling on what it cost. He hadn't cried. He thought Daphne had noticed that he hadn't cried. She'd been waiting by the car, a long black thing that moved without the engine running and didn't require a road if the hedges were obliging, and she'd watched him come down the front path with his pillowcase, and she'd said nothing, and he'd said nothing, and they'd gotten in the car and Astoria had immediately begun telling him about the guest room she'd arranged for him, which had a window facing the east garden and a bookshelf that apparently organized itself if you were patient with it. That had been 3 days ago. Now he stood at the boundary of the grounds in the early morning, watching the mist burn off the grass, and considered the fact that he had slept, properly, warmly, in a bed that was the right size, for 3 nights running, which was more consecutive good sleep than he could remember having at any point in his recent memory. "You're up early." He turned. Daphne was picking her way across the damp lawn toward him, already dressed, not in robes, just ordinary clothes, a dark jumper and trousers, her hair loose for once. She was carrying 2 mugs and she held one out to him when she reached him. Tea. Proper tea, the kind with actual milk in it. He took it. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Slept fine," he said. "Just woke up." She stood beside him and looked out at the tree line. In the early morning, without the composure turned all the way up, she looked more like a 9-year-old and less like a small precise adult. The similarity to Cyrus was most obvious right now, something in the jaw, the economy of expression. "You can feel the wards," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. They shouldn't be accessible to you yet. The bond is still settling. She sipped her tea. But they recognized you anyway. Is that normal? Nothing about this is normal, she said, without particular alarm. Elspeth Greengrass's triad provision is 17 lines in a grimoire that's been in our family for 3 centuries. There's no established literature on what it actually does in practice. We're making this up as we go. Harry considered this. Does that bother you? She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was actually thinking rather than pausing for effect. Yes, she said finally. I don't like not knowing things. I especially don't like not knowing important things. She looked at him sideways. Does it bother you? No, he said. Why not? I grew up not knowing anything, he said. Not knowing and having someone beside me while I figure it out seems better than the alternative. Daphne turned her mug in her hands. The mist was lifting off the grass in slow tendrils and the light was going from gray to gold, and somewhere in the woodland something was singing, a bird, but one he didn't recognize, with a complicated three-note pattern that repeated and varied. That's a coral finch, Daphne said, hearing him tilt his head toward it. Father introduced a pair 7 years ago. They respond to magical environments. The song gets more elaborate the more ambient magic there is in an area. She paused. They've been louder this week. Harry looked at her. She didn't look back. But the corners of her mouth moved, and he had started to learn what that meant. The grimoire came out properly on the 5th day. Isadora brought it to the library after breakfast, the room that had eaten 3 bedrooms, lined floor to ceiling with books and fitted with a long central table that had been polished so many times it had developed a kind of depth, like looking into still water. The 3 children sat at one end of the table. Cyrus sat at the other. Isadora placed the grimoire between them and opened it without ceremony. She had been doing research for 3 nights running. Harry could tell by the small stack of reference volumes already arranged beside her elbow and the 3 pages of close-written notes she unfolded without looking at them. She'd clearly memorized the relevant points and the notes were backup, not crutch. He liked her. He had decided this quietly on the first day and it had solidified since. She was not warm in an obvious way, she didn't ruffle hair or pepper sentences with endearments, but her precision had a quality of care in it. She explained things to Harry with the same completeness she used for her daughters, no simplification, no condescension. She treated him like someone capable of handling information. It was, without question, the most respectful thing an adult had ever done for him. The Greengrass Accord, Isadora said, turning to the marked page. The parchment was thick and dark with age, the ink faded to brown, the handwriting slanted and dense. Original inscription, 1463, by Arabella Greengrass, in the tradition of Slytherin contract magic. Supplementary annotations, 1692, by Elspeth Greengrass. The ward in its standard form is straightforward, we've known about it our whole lives. The triad provision is different, and I want to go through it carefully, because it has implications for all 3 of you that you should understand now rather than encounter unexpectedly later. Astoria had her own notebook open and her quill ready. Harry had been given parchment and a quill the first day and had spent 20 minutes learning to use it without producing something that looked like a spider's crime scene. He was improving. First, Isadora said, the immediate effects. You've all felt the awareness already, the sense of the other's emotional state. This will develop. Over the first year, it will sharpen from general weather into something more textured. You'll still not hear thoughts. But significant emotional states, physical pain above a certain threshold, and, she glanced at her notes, what Elspeth calls moments of magical intensity will register for all 3 of you as clearly as if you were in the same room. Define moments of magical intensity, Daphne said. Casting under high stress. Strong accidental magic. Any situation where one of you is pushing the outer limits of your magical capacity. Isadora looked at Harry. For you in particular, given the nature of your existing magic, this may manifest more strongly than it does for the girls. Because of what happened when I was 1, Harry said. Yes. The magic you carry from that night is not normal, even by our standards. The bond has incorporated it. What that means exactly will become clearer as you all come into your full magical development. She turned a page. Second. The amplification effect. This is the most practically significant aspect of the triad provision and also the most dangerous if mishandled. She paused, and in the pause Harry felt Daphne go very still beside him with the particular stillness of someone about to receive information they've been waiting for. When two or more of you cast in direct cooperation, physical proximity, shared intent, the magic amplifies. Not additively. Multiplicatively. Isadora laid both hands flat on the table. Arabella Greengrass theorized that this was the original purpose of Slytherin's bond methodology. Salazar Slytherin was intensely interested in what he called compound magic, the notion that carefully matched magical signatures could reinforce each other in ways that no individual could achieve alone. The triad was his theoretical ideal. 3 complementary signatures, bound at the foundational level, working in concert. How much amplification? Daphne said. At full development, in direct cooperation, somewhere between 3 and 4 times the effective power of your combined individual output. Isadora said it plainly. That is, substantial. It is also why attempting to sever the bond would be catastrophic. You can't remove something this deeply integrated without taking everything with it, Astoria said. She'd been very quiet through all of this, quill moving steadily across her notebook, and she said it without looking up, like it was simply the next logical statement. Yes, Isadora said. Cyrus had been silent at the far end of the table. He spoke now, his voice carrying the same measured quality as always. There is a third aspect, he said. And I want to be direct with you about it, all 3 of you, because you're old enough and you deserve directness. He looked at Harry, then at Daphne, then at Astoria. The bond is a soulmate bond. Elspeth used that word deliberately and precisely. What that means for children is simply what you've already experienced: connection, attunement, the knowledge that you're not alone. What it means as you grow up is, he stopped. Selected the next words carefully. It means what it means. You don't need to think about that now. But you should know it's there, underneath the practical magic, and it will develop the way the magic does, gradually, naturally, in its own time. We won't be pretending it doesn't exist. A silence. The kind that needed to breathe. Astoria broke it, because Astoria always broke silences, and always at exactly the right moment. So Harry's going to be she started. Don't finish that sentence, Daphne said immediately. I was going to say companion, Astoria said, with injured dignity. You absolutely were not. I might have been. You were going to say, what I was going to say, Astoria said, turning to Harry with her gap-toothed grin and entirely unruffled composure, is that you're stuck with us. Both of us. For the rest of our probably very interesting lives. Harry looked at her. I gathered that on day 1, he said. Aren't you terrified? Should I be? She considered him. Most people would be. Most people haven't lived in a cupboard under the stairs for 6 years, Harry said, and it came out more plainly than he'd intended, but the plain delivery of it seemed to land better than any other delivery would have. Astoria's expression did something quick and complicated and then settled into something that was fiercer and more certain than before. Daphne, at his left, was looking at the grimoire with the studied focus of someone who is keeping their face from doing a thing. Cyrus cleared his throat. There are practical matters, he said. Your education. Harry looked up. You'll begin at Hogwarts in 4 years, Cyrus said. You know the school. I know the name. You know more than the name, or you will by the time you go. Cyrus looked at his wife. Isadora had produced another book from her stack, smaller, newer, a textbook of some kind. You have 4 years before you sit in the Great Hall and a sorting hat decides who you are. I'd rather you went there knowing something. He paused. Not everything. Children should still have discoveries. But the foundational theory, the core principles of magic, the history of the wizarding world, basic wand methodology. You should have that. Who teaches me? Harry said. We do, Daphne said, and there was something in her voice that was trying very hard not to be pleased about this, but wasn't quite managing. Together, Astoria confirmed, with no such restraint. Mother set up a study room. Daphne's been wanting to teach someone for years. I have not. She practices on me, but I keep doing it wrong on purpose because it makes her explain things 3 different ways and the third way is always the best one. Daphne looked at her sister with an expression that contained, beneath the exasperation, a profound and helpless affection. You are genuinely intolerable, she said. You love me, Astoria said serenely. This is the sort of thing you'll be dealing with, Daphne said to Harry, with great seriousness. Indefinitely. I heard you, Astoria said. Good. But Daphne was fighting the smile again, and Harry was watching both of them, and the warm ember in his chest, 3 days old now and already familiar, burned a little steadier. They settled into a rhythm quickly, the way people do when the alternative is chaos and everyone involved has a natural preference for order. Mornings were for structured study, the repurposed sitting room that Isadora had converted into a workroom, with 3 desks in a rough triangle and a blackboard that wrote in 3 colors depending on who was holding the chalk. Daphne taught with systematic precision, building from first principles upward, and Harry found that he liked the architecture of magical theory enormously, the way it had internal logic, rules that were consistent enough to be trusted and flexible enough to be interesting. He was good at it. Not in a performed way, not in the way he'd sometimes been careful at school to be only as clever as was safe, just genuinely, quietly good at it, quick to see the structure, quick to understand why things worked the way they did. Daphne noticed within the first week. He caught her looking at him during a theory exercise. He'd worked out the general principle of sympathetic resonance in magical objects 3 steps ahead of where she was leading him, and for a moment her face was completely open, surprised and pleased in equal measure before she locked it back down. You've got it, she said, which was apparently her highest praise. Show me the next step, Harry said. Afternoons were less structured, which mostly meant that Astoria was in charge and anything could happen. She had a magpie's approach to knowledge. She collected it sideways, from odd angles, through stories and questions and the particular kind of tangential thinking that drove Daphne slightly insane and produced, roughly twice a week, a genuinely useful insight that Daphne would then organize into something coherent and add to the formal curriculum. The first time Harry produced controlled magic without a wand, he was 7, it wasn't supposed to happen deliberately, it was just that Astoria had bet him he couldn't levitate a biscuit off a plate and he'd looked at the biscuit and wanted it to move and it had moved, cleanly and completely, no sparks, no noise. Daphne dropped her quill. Do that again, she said. Harry looked at another biscuit. It lifted. Again. He set it down. Lifted it again. Set it down. Your control is, that's not normal, Daphne said, with the air of someone updating a mental file. Wandless accidental magic, yes, but controlled wandless magic at 7, that's brilliant, Astoria said, already climbing onto her chair to reach the higher shelf of biscuits. Can you do it from further away? Harry looked at the tin on the shelf. It slid to the edge, tipped, and he caught it wandlessly before it fell. The silence that followed was the good kind. We need to tell Mother, Daphne said. Obviously, Astoria agreed. But first, biscuits. Isadora, when told, was characteristically unfazed. She added a practical magic component to the morning sessions, moved some theoretical material to evenings, and requisitioned 3 books from the library's restricted section that she let Harry read with annotations. She did not make a fuss about what he could do. She simply adjusted to incorporate it, which was, Harry was coming to understand, Isadora Greengrass's fundamental approach to most things. Cyrus was more openly interested. He observed one of the morning sessions at the end of the second week, sitting in the back corner with a cup of tea and saying nothing, watching Harry work through a theoretical problem on the blackboard while Daphne challenged each step from her desk and Astoria drew increasingly elaborate diagrams in the margin of her notes. After the session he stopped Harry in the hallway. You're reasoning about magic structurally, he said. Not following rules. Understanding them. Is there a difference? Harry said. The difference is everything, Cyrus said. He studied Harry for a moment. Most children learn magic the way they learn spelling: memorize the rule, apply the rule, move on. What you're doing is, you're looking at why the rule exists. Why it holds. Where it breaks down. He paused. That is a much older approach. A harder one. But if you can maintain it, the ceiling is, he seemed to decide against finishing the sentence. We'll get you a wand before school, he said instead. Ollivander. Not from the general stock, the full consultation. Won't the wand just choose me? Harry said. Cyrus's eyes crinkled. It was the most expressive thing his face did. It will, he said. But I want Ollivander to see what chooses you. He's old enough and wise enough to find that information useful. The letter came on the third week. It arrived in the morning, carried by a very formal-looking owl with the bearing of something official, addressed to Cyrus Greengrass in a hand that Harry didn't recognize. Cyrus read it at the breakfast table without changing his expression, which told Harry immediately that it was important. Cyrus only went fully neutral when something required it. Isadora took it from him when he set it down. She read it and her jaw tightened by approximately 2 millimeters. What is it? Daphne said. Cyrus and Isadora looked at each other. Lucius Malfoy has written to request a meeting, Cyrus said. The name hit the room differently than other names did. Daphne's posture stiffened by a fraction. Astoria went very still, a different still from Daphne's, less controlled and more watchful, the way small animals go still when they hear something large move nearby. Harry had no reference for the name. Who is he? He said. An old family, Daphne said. Her voice was careful. Ancient house, like ours. He was a significant supporter of, she stopped. Of Voldemort, Harry said. Daphne looked at him. Most adults flinched at the name. Harry said it without flourish, simply because it was the name, and Daphne's expression did that thing it did when he surprised her, a quick recalibration, something shifting in behind her eyes. Yes, she said. He was never formally charged. He claimed he'd been acting under the Imperius curse. Do people believe that? Some do, Cyrus said. Some find it convenient to believe it. He picked up his tea. Lucius is a very effective politician. He prefers to work through legal and institutional channels, which makes him more dangerous than people who prefer direct confrontation. What does he want? Harry said. Cyrus looked at him with that calm, measuring regard. I expect, he said, that he's heard something. We've been discreet, but the Accord activated in the middle of Diagon Alley on a market day. People noticed the Orasong vine. Someone would have talked. And if he knows, Isadora said, he'll want to know what we intend. Whether we intend to leverage it publicly. Whether, she set down the letter. He has a son. Draco. A year behind Daphne at Hogwarts. The Malfoys have had their eye on a match with the Greengrass family for some time. The implications arranged themselves in Harry's mind with the unpleasant clarity of a pattern clicking into place. He wants to know if the Accord is real, Daphne said. Because if it is, that door is closed. Yes, Cyrus said. So what do you tell him? Harry said. Cyrus set down his own cup. He looked at Harry the way he sometimes looked at him, that look that was taking a longer measurement than the immediate moment. What would you tell him? He said. Harry thought about it for exactly as long as it took. The truth, he said. All of it. The triad provision, the details, everything. Because if he already suspects and you try to minimize it, he'll spend the next 10 years testing the edges of whatever story you told him. But if you tell him the full truth and make it very clear you consider it settled, he has to decide whether to accept it or oppose it openly, and open opposition to a legally binding ancient house blood contract is, politically difficult, Daphne said, staring at him. Yes. Harry picked up his toast. And from what you've said, difficult isn't a place he likes to be. A silence. Astoria was looking at Harry with her pen suspended above her notebook at an angle that suggested she'd forgotten she was holding it. Isadora was looking at Cyrus. Cyrus said, "Daphne, what do you think of that assessment?" Daphne looked at her father. Then at Harry. Then back at her father. "It's correct," she said. "I'd add one thing, any meeting with Malfoy should happen in a formal context, with witnesses. He's more cautious when he can be observed." "Agreed," Cyrus said. He looked at Isadora. "The ministry cocktail reception next month." "Precisely what I was thinking," she said. Harry ate his toast and thought about a man he'd never met, who had already decided to be a problem, and found that he wasn't particularly worried. He was 7 years old and he was living in a manor that smelled of old magic and clean linen and whatever Isadora was growing in the East Conservatory, and he had spent 3 weeks having every morning and afternoon filled with information and questions and 2 people who argued with him like arguing was a form of respect, which he was starting to think it was. Lucius Malfoy could wait. The wand happened on a Saturday near the end of August, 6 weeks after Diagon Alley. They went as a group, all 5 of them, because Cyrus had been serious about wanting Ollivander to observe. Ollivander's shop was narrow and tall and smelled of sawdust and something older underneath it, and Ollivander himself was exactly as strange as advertised, pale eyes that had no natural resting state, that moved between things and people like they were cataloging everything simultaneously. He looked at Harry for a long time before he said anything. "I wondered," he said finally, "when I'd see you." "I got a late start," Harry said. Something in Ollivander's pale eyes shifted, interest, and something that might have been amusement. "So you did." He glanced at the 2 girls flanking Harry, then at Cyrus, then back at Harry. "The accord," he said. Just those 2 words, no question mark. "Yes," Cyrus said. Ollivander hummed to himself and disappeared into the stacks. The sound of measuring tape moving, of boxes sliding, of the old particular thinking of a craftsman at work. He came back 3 times with sets of wands before he paused, looked at Harry again, and went somewhere deeper into the shop. When he returned, he was carrying a single box. He opened it. The wand inside was 11 inches, holly wood, with a core of phoenix feather. It looked unremarkable. It was, somehow, nothing. Harry picked it up. The warmth that moved through him was not the same as the warmth of the bond, that was deep and internal and continuous. This was immediate and outward, a rush that moved from his hand up his arm and out through his fingertips in a cascade of light, red and gold, and the entire shop's accumulated magical objects chimed once, simultaneously, like a single struck bell. Ollivander said nothing for a moment. "Curious," he said finally. "You've seen this wand before," Cyrus said. It was not a question. "The brother wand," Ollivander said, "gave Harry Potter his scar." He looked at Harry with those pale cataloguing eyes. "The phoenix who gave a feather for this wand gave only one other. The wand that belongs to Tom Riddle." He paused. Lord Voldemort, as he preferred to be known. The shop was quiet except for the faint ringing that was still fading from the shelves. "I know," Harry said. He said it with the same plainness he used for most important things, because it was already information he'd incorporated, filed, adjusted to. He could feel the wand hum against his palm. "It fits," he said. "It does," Ollivander said. "Perhaps the most perfectly I've seen a wand fit a wizard." He paused. "Or a wizard fit a wand." Another pause, as if he were deciding something. "There is a thing I will tell you, because I suspect you are the sort of person who uses information well. This wand will serve you as well as any wand has ever served anyone. But it will not be your only instrument." He looked at Harry's right hand, his wandless hand. "You already know that." "Yes," Harry said. "Good." Ollivander closed the empty box. "Don't abuse it." I won't. On the way out, Daphne walked beside Harry while Astoria ran ahead to investigate a display of enchanted quills in the next shop over. Daphne was quiet for a block, which meant she was thinking, and Harry had learned to wait out her silences rather than fill them. "Brother Wand," she said finally. "To Voldemort's." "Yes. Does that mean what I think it means? For what's coming?" She paused, and chose the word carefully. "For the scar." "Probably," Harry said. "And you're not frightened?" He considered the question honestly, the way he tried to consider most questions. "I think I would be if I were facing it alone," he said. "The thing I've been most frightened of, I think, it's not danger. It's not knowing something's coming and being the only one who sees it." He looked at her. "I'm not alone anymore." Daphne was quiet for 2 more steps. "No," she said. "You're not." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The bond hummed between them like a second heartbeat, steady and settled, and ahead of them Astoria had found the quills and was trying to convince a shopkeeper that a self-writing quill that composed bad poetry was a legitimate academic tool, and the morning was warm and the street was loud and Harry Potter walked through the wizarding world for only the second time in his life and felt, absolutely and precisely, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The last evening before school was 4 years away still, but the summer was almost done and Daphne and Astoria's parents were taking them to Edinburgh for a week to see Isadora's sister, and Harry was going. He was going with them. He'd nearly said of course out loud when Cyrus had told him the plan and then caught himself, but the night before they left, the 3 of them sat in the library until late. Astoria had fallen asleep across 2 chairs pushed together, her notebook still open on her chest, quill dangling from her fingers. Daphne was reading. Harry was thinking. "She does that," Daphne said, not looking up from her book. "Falls asleep mid-project. She's done it since she was 3. Does it bother you?" Harry said. "No." A pause. "It used to, when we were little. I thought she wasn't taking things seriously." She turned a page. "I understand it better now. She takes everything seriously. She just does it with her whole body, not just her mind." Harry looked at Astoria, asleep and entirely unself-conscious, her hair spread out behind her. He looked at Daphne, who was awake and entirely self-contained, reading in the lamplight with the particular focused stillness of someone completely at home in their own mind. 2 different kinds of serious. 2 different kinds of presence. "The bond knows," Harry said. Daphne looked up. "That's why it chose all 3 of us," he said. "Not just because my magic was strong enough. Because you balance each other. You always have. And he stopped. "And you what?" He thought about it. "I need both," he said. "I think. I need what you are and what she is, together, or, I don't know. I think I'd drift toward one or the other. Toward too much stillness or too much forward motion." He paused. "The bond isn't just about power. It's about what we make each other." Daphne was very still, her kind of still, the carrying something carefully kind. "You've been thinking about this for a while," she said. "Since Ollivander," he said. "Since the wand." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her book, but she didn't read it. She looked at it in the way you look at something when you're actually looking inward. "Daphne," he said. "Yes. For what it's worth, I'm glad it was you. Both of you." He said it simply. "I know you didn't choose it, neither did you." "No. But I'm glad anyway." He looked at the fire. "I think I'm going to be glad for a long time." The silence that followed was the warmest thing Harry had ever been inside. Daphne closed her book. She didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. She simply put the book aside, leaned her head back against the chair, and let herself be quiet without armoring the quiet, and Harry watched the fire and listened to Astoria breathe and felt the bond hum through all three of them like a chord held long enough to become music. Outside, the coral finch sang once, somewhere in the dark garden. More elaborate than ever. Chapter 3, Hogwarts does not know what to do with this. The Hogwarts Express smelled like old velvet and coal smoke and the particular anticipatory tension of 100 children who had been waiting for this day for years, and Harry stood on platform 9 3/4 with a trunk, an owl, and the absolute certainty that the next few hours were going to be complicated. Daphne stood to his left, her trunk already loaded, her expression doing the thing where it was completely composed on the surface and running at full speed underneath. She'd been quiet since breakfast, which wasn't unusual for Daphne, but the quality of the quiet was different, focused in a way that suggested she'd been running scenarios since approximately 4 in the morning and had not yet encountered one she was fully satisfied with. Astoria stood to his right, vibrating at a frequency that was technically invisible but practically obvious to anyone who knew her, which at this point was essentially everyone on the platform within a 10-foot radius. She'd already catalogued 6 people she recognized, pointed out a ghost that Harry hadn't noticed drifting through the rear carriage, and consumed an impressive amount of Isadora's travel shortbread. "Stop running scenarios," Harry said to Daphne, without looking at her. She looked at him sharply. "I'm not. You've been silent for 40 minutes and your left hand keeps moving like you're writing a list on your thigh." She looked at her left hand. It was, in fact, doing exactly that. She stilled it. "I was reviewing the possibilities for the sorting," she said, with dignity. And I don't like any of them." Harry had thought about the sorting too. He'd thought about it carefully and come to peace with the conclusion about 3 weeks ago, which was that whatever the hat decided, it decided, and the political noise after would be just that, noise. He'd tried to share this perspective with Daphne. She'd listened to it thoughtfully and then gone back to running scenarios. "It'll put me in Slytherin," Daphne said. "Obviously," Astoria said. "It'll put Astoria in," she looked at her sister. "Slytherin," Astoria said, with somewhat less certainty. "Slytherin," Daphne agreed, with the tone of someone who was genuinely not sure this was correct but needed to say it to hear how it sounded. "And Harry," Astoria said, looking at him with something that was sharp and curious and already a little braced. "Gryffindor," Harry said. They both looked at him. He'd said it with the same plainness he used for obvious facts. "You don't know that," Daphne said. "My father was. My mother was. The bond magic runs through Slytherin blood work, but I'm not Slytherin, I don't think. He considered himself briefly and honestly. I like knowing things and I like being useful and I don't like letting people down. But the thing that drives me isn't ambition or cleverness. It's just," he stopped. "Forward," Astoria said. He looked at her. "You always go forward," she said. "Whatever the thing is, you just go at it. You don't circle it or plan it first. You just go." "Gryffindor," Daphne said, in a tone that had moved from uncertain to resigned to, finally, quietly amused. "3 houses. 3 houses," Harry agreed. She pressed her lips together. "The Board of Governors is going to have feelings about this." "They can have all the feelings they like," Harry said, and picked up his trunk. The sorting was, objectively, one of the more dramatic events the Great Hall had seen in several decades, and given that the Great Hall had a fairly robust history of dramatic events, this was saying something. Harry went third alphabetically. There were 2 Patils before him, which gave him time to sit on the stool and breathe once before the parchment unrolled to Potter, Harry, and the noise happened. It wasn't a unified noise. It was several noises, braided together: recognition, that particular sound of many people realizing the same thing simultaneously, and then excitement, and then, from the Slytherin table, something more complicated and layered that Harry would later learn to parse. He sat on the stool and looked at the hall, 12 years old, taller than he'd been at 7 by a significant amount, the glasses he'd been given by the Greengrasses when they'd noticed him squinting at blackboards, the wand that hummed against his hip, and he did not perform composure or humility or anything else. He just sat, and looked, and waited. The hat came down over his eyes and the darkness was total. "Well," said a voice in his head, and it was amused, immediately and genuinely amused, in the way of something very old encountering something that had surprised it. "You're interesting." "Thank you," Harry thought. "The bond. I can feel it from here." A pause, the hat seemed to be examining something. "Three-way. Ancient Slytherin work. And you're not the Slytherin of the three." "I know. You could be," the hat said. "You've the mind for it. The strategic thinking, the patience, the capacity to play a long game when you need to. There's enough there that the sorting would hold." "But?" Harry thought. But the girl was right. "You always go forward." Another pause. "And there's something else. Something underneath all the strategy and the patience and the careful observation." The hat was quiet for a moment in a way that felt significant. "You're very angry," it said. "Not as accusation. As observation. You've been angry for a long time. You're just very good at keeping it where it belongs." Harry didn't have anything to say to that. "Gryffindor," the hat said, "is the right house for someone who runs toward things. But I want you to know that anger you're carrying isn't a flaw, boy. It's fuel. Don't let anyone tell you to put it down." The hat shouted, "Gryffindor," to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it on the stool, and walked to his new table through a noise that felt like weather, and he did not look at the Slytherin table because he didn't need to. He could feel the bond, could feel both of them watching him, and what he felt from Daphne was something careful and adjusting, and what he felt from Astoria was simply warm and entirely unsurprised. He sat down next to a red-haired boy who immediately stuck out his hand and said, "Ron Weasley," with the relief of someone who had needed someone to talk to since the train and had been waiting for his moment. "Harry Potter," Harry said, and shook it. Ron's eyes went wide. "Blimey," he said. Then, recovering with surprising speed, "You sat with the Greengrass girls on the train." "Yes." "They're Slytherin." "Yes." "Both of them?" "Daphne, yes." "Astoria," he glanced down the table to where the first-year Slytherins were sitting, and yes, Daphne was there, composed and watchful. The Gryffindors were still cheering around him. "We'll see." Astoria Greengrass was called 20 minutes later, and the hat sat on her head for approximately 11 seconds before it called Hufflepuff, with what Harry would swear was a note of satisfaction. The hall paused. 3 houses. The first whispers started immediately. Daphne, across the hall, had gone so still she looked carved. Harry felt her doing the rapid scenario rerun, Hufflepuff, not Slytherin, which means the 3 of us are in all 3 different houses, which means anyone paying attention will notice the pattern immediately, which means, he sent her something back through the bond. Not words. Just, steady. She felt it. He knew she felt it because the stillness shifted from carved to simply composed, and she lifted her chin by a fraction that only he would have noticed, and looked exactly like someone who had been expecting precisely this and was not remotely concerned about it. Astoria found her seat at the Hufflepuff table looking absolutely delighted, which was, Harry decided, exactly right. The first public confrontation happened on the 3rd day. It happened in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, which was perhaps not the dramatic setting anyone would have written for it, but that was the thing about confrontations, they didn't ask permission. Draco Malfoy had been watching Harry since the sorting with the particular focused attention of someone who had been given instructions and was deciding how to execute them. He was pale and pointed and moved through the school with the confidence of someone who had been told, all his life, that he mattered more than other people and had chosen to believe it fully. He was flanked at nearly all times by 2 large boys named Crabbe and Goyle who functioned as furniture that occasionally walked. He stopped Harry in the corridor with the deliberate placement of someone who had chosen the spot. "Potter," he said. Harry stopped walking. He was with Ron, who immediately went slightly rigid beside him. The Weasleys and the Malfoys had history, Harry had gathered, in the way that two families who have always been on opposite sides of every political question tend to accumulate history. "Malfoy," Harry said. Draco looked at him with pale eyes that were trying to do the same assessing thing his fathers did, and weren't quite managing it. "I heard about the bond," he said. He said it quietly, which was more interesting than saying it loudly. He wasn't performing, he was delivering information. "My father told me about it before the term started." "Then you know it's real," Harry said. "He said you'd probably try to use it. Leverage it. The Greengrass name." "I'm 11, Harry said. "What exactly would I leverage it for?" "Social positioning. Access. The Greengrass family has, I know what the Greengrass family has," Harry said. "I've been living with them for 4 years." He kept his voice level and pleasant and completely unimpressed. "I'm not using anyone for anything. The bond isn't a tool. He thought about how to put it. It's just what happened." Draco studied him. There was something in his expression that was less sneering than people seemed to expect from him. Harry had the impression that the sneer was a default setting, a kind of inherited posture, and that underneath it Draco Malfoy was actually quite curious. "My father says you're dangerous," Draco said. "Your father might be right," Harry said pleasantly. "A beat. He won't let it stand," Draco said. And now there was something in his voice that was different, not a threat, more like a warning. Like someone delivering a message they hadn't composed. "You should know that." "I do know that," Harry said. "I've known it since I was 7. Tell your father." He stopped, reconsidered, and picked the most effective version of the thing. "Don't tell your father anything. He's watching, isn't he? He'll draw his own conclusions." Draco blinked. Harry walked past him. Ron fell into step beside him, waited until they'd turned the corner, and said, "That was mental, is what that was." "Which part?" "All of it. You talked to Draco Malfoy like he was a third year complaining about homework." "I talked to him like he was a person," Harry said. "He is one, underneath everything his father's put on him." He glanced back around the corner. Draco was still standing in the corridor, staring after him. "He's not the problem. His father is." Ron considered this for several steps. "You're very strange," he said, in the tone of someone for whom this was a compliment. "So I've been told," Harry said. The thing about being in 3 different houses was that it made all 3 of them functionally invisible in the usual sense of school social dynamics. No one could quite place them, which meant no one could quite dismiss them, which Daphne had identified within the first week as an asset and Astoria had identified within the first day as hilarious. They met in the library. This was a logistical decision more than anything else, neutral ground, accessible to everyone, large enough that 3 students from different houses spending time together didn't look like a statement. Within a week, their table in the northeast corner of the 3rd floor had become, by unspoken agreement, their table. Daphne was efficient in the library the way she was efficient everywhere. She went at her work in straight lines, finished it, and then read ahead. Harry had learned from 4 years with her that the reading ahead was not anxiety, it was appetite. She genuinely wanted to know what came next. Astoria was chaos in the library, but productive chaos. She started 3 books simultaneously, made notes that cross-referenced all of them, and produced essays that their teachers consistently described as unconventional but perceptive, which Harry had decided was teacher language for "we're not sure how you got here but we can't argue with the conclusion." Harry had developed somewhere between their 2 approaches. He read with Daphne's focus and Astoria's lateral thinking, which occasionally produced conclusions that surprised all 3 of them. It was in the library, 2 weeks into term, that the first real evidence of the bond's magical properties made itself publicly known. Harry was working through a theory problem. Flitwick had assigned the first-year class an essay on the principles of Wingardium Leviosa, which Harry found pleasant rather than challenging, when something shifted in the bond. Not quite pain. More like heat, sudden and sharp, on the left side of his awareness where Daphne lived. He looked up. Daphne was 3 tables away, her back to him, writing. Nothing visibly wrong. But the heat was still there, building. He stood up before he'd made a conscious decision to stand, crossed the library in 10 seconds, and sat down at her table. She looked up. Her face was controlled. Her quill hand was not, it was pressed flat against the table in the way that people press their hands flat when they're managing something physical. What happened? He said, low. Nothing, she said. Daphne. She looked at him. Then, very quietly, there was an incident in potions. Snape made a comment about, she stopped. It doesn't matter what he said. She was choosing words with unusual care, which meant the words she was discarding were significant. He suggested that the bond was a parasitic arrangement. That I had been, she stopped again. Harry waited. Ensnared, she said. Like the word tasted wrong. The anger was very clean and very cold. Harry let himself feel it for exactly a moment and then filed it where it belonged. Did you respond? He said. In potions, to Snape? No. Her jaw was tight. Which was the correct decision? He can make my life very unpleasant if he chooses to, and he's already chosen to make it unpleasant for you by association, so, don't, Harry said. She looked at him. Don't manage your responses based on what might protect me, he said. I don't need that. Someone called me ensnared, Daphne said, and the control cracked by exactly 1 syllable. In front of the entire potions class. Like I was something that had happened to me. Like I didn't, she pressed her lips together. I know who I am. I know what I chose. But it was, I know, Harry said. You can't know, you weren't, I know because I felt it, he said. When it happened. I was in the library and you were in the dungeon and I felt it hit you. He held her gaze. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter, because it does. I'm going to tell you that what he said is wrong, and that you know it's wrong, and that the people who matter know it's wrong, and that the people who don't know it are not your problem to educate. Daphne looked at him for a long time. Her hand relaxed on the table, incrementally, the tension leaving her fingers. You sound like my father, she said. Your father's usually right. He is, she agreed. A pause. Don't tell Astoria. Astoria will already know. I know, but don't confirm it. She'll do something. What kind of something? The kind that Hufflepuffs technically can't get in trouble for but which is still enormously disruptive. A very faint smile. She managed to publicly embarrass a 7th-year Slytherin last week using only a piece of toast and a very well-timed observation. She's creative. I like her methods, Harry said. I know you do. She picked up her quill again, steady now, the crisis managed, filed away, moved past. Go finish your essay. Yes, Professor Greengrass, he said. She actually laughed. It was small and private and she turned it into a halfway through, but he'd heard it and she knew he'd heard it and neither of them mentioned it. The bond made itself publicly visible for the first time in October, in the middle of a first-year flying lesson that had started normally and deteriorated rapidly when Neville Longbottom's broom decided to behave badly. Harry had been fine on a broom from the first moment he sat on one. It felt like wandless magic, that same direct translation between intention and result, and he'd been hovering steadily and watching Neville with the attention of someone who had noticed 3 minutes ago that Neville's broom was responding badly to his nerves and was about to do something dramatic. It did something dramatic. Neville shot upward, broom lurching, and came off at 20 feet in the air with a sound like a small surprised explosion. Harry was already moving, upward and hard, no thought, no calculation, just the pure forward motion that the hat had identified and Astoria had named, and he caught Neville's wrist 7 feet from the ground while Neville's body was still in freefall. He hadn't used the broom for the catch. He'd used the air itself, or something in him that understood air the way he understood most things, structurally, fundamentally, by the underlying rules rather than the surface ones. Madam Hooch was making a sound he'd never heard an adult make before. Neville landed on his feet. He had a remembrall in his right hand, which had somehow survived the whole ordeal, its smoke gone red with some deeply relevant forgotten memory. He looked up at Harry with the expression of someone who had just been handed a second life and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "You all right?" Harry said. "I think so," Neville said faintly. "Your wrist grip was the problem," Harry said. "You're holding it like you're frightened it'll leave. Try holding it like," he considered the right metaphor, "like a book you want to keep the page in. Enough to hold, not enough to crumple." Neville looked at him. "You're explaining flying like it's about grip." "It is about grip," Harry said. "That and," he tapped his sternum. "Breathing. If you're not breathing, the broom gets confused." "Broomsticks don't have feelings," someone said from the ground. Harry looked down. Most of the class had gathered below him. He was still 8 feet up, he hadn't fully registered that. Madam Hooch was staring. Several students were staring. At the edge of the group, Draco Malfoy had the remembrall, which he'd picked up from the ground. "Give that back," Harry said. "Come down and get it," Draco said. "Not cruel exactly, testing. The same quality as the corridor. He was always testing." Harry looked at him. Then he did something that he hadn't particularly planned. He let go of his broom with both hands, stayed where he was in the air as if the ground were optional, reached out his right hand, and the remembrall flew from Draco's fingers across the 20 feet between them and settled in his palm. The absolute silence that followed had texture. He floated down, landing with no particular drama, and handed the remembrall to Neville. Neville took it like he was receiving something slightly radioactive. "I want everyone's attention on the brooms," Madam Hooch said, in the voice of someone who had decided the sanest thing was to continue as if she had not just seen that. "Now." Draco had not moved. He was staring at Harry with an expression that had gone past testing into something more genuine, not fear, not anger. More like the face of someone revising a document they thought was finished. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder, because Ron had begun doing this, materializing beside Harry whenever anything happened, with the reliable loyalty of someone who had decided on day one where he stood and intended to stay there. "Did you just," Ron said quietly, wandlessly summon something? "In your first flying lesson? As a first year?" "Yes," Harry said. "Right," Ron said. "Right, okay. That's fine. That's completely, yeah." Harry almost smiled. He looked back at the sky, at the brooms lined up obediently in the air, and thought about what the hat had said about anger and fuel, and thought about the way Daphne had described the bond's amplification effect in that first library session years ago, 3 and 4 times the effective power, and thought that he wasn't even touching it yet. That what people were seeing when they watched him was just him, alone, on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He hadn't even started. News of the flying lesson reached everywhere it needed to reach within 24 hours, which was the approximate transit speed of Hogwarts gossip, and its first significant consequence was Professor McGonagall appearing at the door of Harry's Transfiguration class the next morning and asking him to come with her, which was how Harry became the first-year seeker on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, which Ron considered the best news he'd received in years. Its second consequence was a letter from Cyrus Greengrass, arriving with the Morning Owls 2 days later, which read, "I have heard. Be careful." And then, in a different ink, like it had been added after, "Well done." Harry folded it and put it in his inside pocket. Its third consequence arrived in the form of a note delivered to Daphne at dinner, which she read, folded, and passed to Harry across the library table that evening without comment. No signature. Harry read it twice. "Lucius," he said. "Working through channels," Daphne confirmed. "Like father said he would. What does the board want with it?" "Legitimacy," Daphne said. She was doing the still and thinking thing. If he can get the board to question the validity of the accord, on procedural grounds, say, or claim the triad provision was never formally registered, then it creates space to challenge it in the Wisengamot later. Can he do that? He can try. Her eyes were sharp. The accord is in the grimoire, and the grimoire is authenticated. But Lucius is very good at finding the gap between what is true and what can be proved to be true in a formal setting. Astoria appeared from behind a bookshelf with a stack of books that she placed on the table with a soft decisive thud. "I borrowed these from the restricted section," she said. "Or rather, I asked Professor Sprout to borrow them, which is different and entirely legitimate. Contract law, blood magic precedent, Wisengamot procedure." She sat down. "If he's going the institutional route, we need to know the terrain." Harry looked at her. She was 11 years old and she had just treated a political threat from one of the most powerful men in the wizarding world as a research project. "You're terrifying," he told her. "I prefer prepared," she said. "But I'll take terrifying." "He'll escalate if we prepare," Daphne said. "He'll see the research as a challenge." "He's already escalated," Astoria said. "The letter means he's committed. There's no version where we don't prepare." She looked at Harry. "He's not going to win. I want that stated clearly, for the record." "For the record," Harry agreed. Daphne looked between the two of them with an expression that contained approximately equal parts calculation, exasperation, and affection. "We need Father's legal contacts," she said. "And we need to respond to the board request on our terms, not his." "Your father's already moving," Harry said. "He said well done at the end of that letter. He wouldn't have done that if he were only warning us. He's telling us he's watching and he approves of what we've been doing." Daphne absorbed this. Astoria was already writing. "All right," Daphne said. "Then we work." She pulled the first contract law volume toward her. "Don't either of you fall asleep." "That's aimed at me," Astoria said. "Obviously. I'm not going to fall asleep. I'm far too annoyed." "Good," Daphne said. "Stay annoyed. It'll keep you sharp." She opened the book. "Harry, start with the Wisengamot procedure volume. Look for any precedent on contested triad bonds. I want historical cases." Harry pulled the book over. "There won't be many." "No," she agreed. "But we need to know what exists." A pause. "We should be better informed than any adult who sits across from us in that chamber." "We're 11, Harry noted. "We're 11 now," Daphne said, and turned the page, and Harry thought about the long patient game that Cyrus had described, about how Lucius Malfoy worked through institutions and time, and then he thought about 3 children sitting in a library at 9 in the evening reading legal texts by lamplight and building something that would take years to build but that they were already, right now, building. He thought about the hat's voice in the dark. Anger. Fuel. Don't put it down. He turned his own page and started to read. The night before the Halloween feast, a month into term, a year already changing shape around them, Harry was walking back from a late Quidditch practice when he passed the first-floor girls' bathroom and heard something through the door that was not crying in the ordinary way. It was more specific than that. It was the sound of someone who had been crying for so long they'd gone past the part where it hurt and into the hollow, echoing part where it was just happening because it wouldn't stop. He stopped walking. He knocked on the door, because it was a girl's bathroom and he was 12 and he knocked rather than assuming. "Hello?" he said. The crying stopped with the abruptness of something hidden. Then, after a moment, "Who is it?" "Harry Potter. I heard you from the corridor. Are you all right?" A long pause. "Go away." "All right," he said. He didn't go away. He sat down on the corridor floor with his back against the wall beside the door. "I'll be out here if you decide you want company." Another long pause. "That's very strange," the voice said. I've been told. The door opened a crack. A girl with bushy hair and red-rimmed eyes looked at him with the expression of someone who had been discovered doing something private and couldn't quite decide whether to be grateful or mortified. He recognized her, Hermione Granger, top of every class so far, the kind of aggressively capable that sometimes got lonely. He knew that kind. "You're sitting on the floor," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you sounded like you needed someone nearby who wasn't going to ask you to perform being okay." He looked up at her. "You don't have to be okay. It's the corridor. No audience." Hermione Granger looked at him for a long moment. She had the same quality Daphne had, he noticed, that quick precise intelligence operating behind the face, but where Daphne wore it like armor, Hermione wore it like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. Like she hadn't yet made peace with the fact that being the cleverest person in the room was not the same as being liked by that room. "Someone said I was insufferable," she said. "Were they a Weasley?" he said. She blinked. "How did you, Ron?" he said. "He's good, but he says things without thinking. He'll regret it tomorrow. He regrets most things he says without thinking by tomorrow." He paused. "He'll apologize badly. Weasleys apologize badly, too much energy, not enough words. But he'll mean it." She was looking at him very carefully. "You know an awful lot about people," she said. "I grew up paying attention," he said. It was a survival skill. She looked at him for another moment, and then she did something that was characteristic of her. He would come to understand. She made a decision and committed to it instantly and completely. She came out of the bathroom and sat down on the floor beside him, not quite touching, with her knees pulled to her chest and her hair falling around her shoulders. "I'm Hermione," she said. "I know." He held out his hand and she shook it formally, which made him smile. "Do you want to come to the feast? It's starting in 10 minutes. "I look like I've been crying," she said. "Most of the first years look like they've been mildly traumatized by transfiguration," he said. "You'll blend in." She almost laughed. It was tentative, the laugh of someone who wasn't sure yet whether laughter was safe, but it was there. "You were in Professor McGonagall's class," she said. "You transfigured the matchstick on the first try." "Second try," he said. "The first one was slightly on fire." "Still second in the class." "Who was first?" She looked at him. "Oh," he said. "Nice work." She smiled properly then, a small, surprised smile, like she wasn't used to the compliment landing that way. He stood and offered his hand to pull her up, and she took it, and they walked toward the great hall and the noise. They were halfway there when the troll came around the corner. It smelled like something had died inside something else that had also died, and it was 12 feet tall and carrying a club with the casual destructive indifference of something that had never needed to be careful about anything, and it turned its small eyes toward them and seemed, in its dim and violent way, to decide that they would do. Harry stepped in front of Hermione without deciding to. He looked at the troll. He looked at it the way he looked at most things, straight on, practically, assessing what was true about it rather than what was frightening. What was true was that it was large, slow, and the club was its whole offensive strategy. What was also true was that 12 feet tall was only a problem if you were fighting at ground level. He went up. Not on a broom. Just up, wandless, clean, the same way he'd gone after Neville 3 weeks ago, hovering at the troll's eye level, which startled it enormously, because trolls were not accustomed to things being at eye level that weren't other trolls. The troll swung the club at him. He wasn't there when the club arrived. "Hermione," he said, from approximately 10 feet up and slightly to the left. "Run back and get a teacher. Loud as you can." "I can help," she said from the floor, voice steady in the way voices go steady when someone has decided that fear is going to have to wait. "I know you can," he said. "I need you to run anyway because I need someone who can actually alert the teachers while I keep its attention." He looked at her over the troll's head. This is a job that requires your specific skills. She ran. He listened to her footsteps go. The troll turned back to him, confused and annoyed, and Harry looked at it from 10 feet up and started doing something with the air around the troll's head that he'd been doing instinctively with brooms for months, creating a differential, a pressure, and the troll began to look confused in a more fundamental way, which was the beginning of useful. Teachers arrived in 90 seconds. McGonagall in front, Quirrell behind, Snape to the right, all three of them arriving at slightly different angles and collectively encountering a scene that none of them had prepared for, a 12-foot troll sitting on the floor holding its own head with an expression of profound bewilderment, and a first-year student floating at eye level with his arms crossed, watching it with the detached attention of someone monitoring a pot that wasn't quite boiling. "Potter," McGonagall said, with the voice of someone who had been startled past her usual register and had not yet returned to it. "Come down." Harry came down. "Are you hurt?" "No, Professor." She looked at the troll. She looked at him. She looked at the ceiling as if asking it something. 50 points to Gryffindor, she said finally. "And a letter home." "Which home?" he said. She looked at him with an expression that was, beneath the sternness, not entirely without warmth. "The one that will be appropriately alarmed," she said. "Greengrass Manor," he said. "Yes," she said. "That one." The troll sneezed. It was enormous and wet and deeply undignified, and it knocked Quirrell sideways by 2 feet, and from somewhere down the corridor Hermione Granger could be heard giving a very precise eyewitness account to Professor Flitwick that covered spatial dimensions, defensive strategy, and approximately 3 questions about the mechanics of wandless levitation. Harry looked at the troll. The troll looked back. "Good talk," Harry said, and went to find Ron before the feast ended. Later that night, all the students returned to their houses, the troll removed, the castle quiet. Harry lay in his dormitory bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the bond. Daphne was awake, he could feel it, not distressed, just awake and waiting. Astoria was asleep, that bright settled warmth, banked for the night. He sent Daphne something. Not words. Just, fine. All fine. A pause. Then something came back that was warmer than her usual careful warmth, something that was less managed, less contained. Something that said, "I know, I felt the whole thing, I was about to come down to the first floor regardless of any rule about house boundaries, but in the way that feelings say things rather than words." He smiled at the ceiling. He thought about Lucius Malfoy and the Board of Governors and the long road ahead and the Wiesengemot and the legal books in the library and all of it. He thought about the troll's bewildered face. He thought about Hermione's tentative laugh in the corridor and Neville's expression when Harry explained the broom like it was simple. He thought about what Astoria had said in September, matter-of-factly, standing on the platform with the train behind them and the year ahead. "Stuck with us. For the rest of our probably very interesting lives." He turned over, closed his eyes, and slept without difficulty in the warm and steady hum of a bond that had decided, 3 houses and all complications and Lucius Malfoy notwithstanding, that it was exactly where it was meant to be. Chapter 4, The War in the Wall's second year arrived the way second years do, with the particular confidence of people who now knew where the bathrooms were and had opinions about which professors assigned too much homework, which was all of them according to Ron and none of them according to Hermione, with Harry somewhere in the practical middle. The corridors felt smaller than they had in September of first year, not because the castle had changed but because they had, and Harry had spent a summer at Greengrass Manor that had included 2 months of accelerated study, a week of correspondence with Hermione that had somehow evolved into a genuine friendship conducted entirely through parchment, and 1 extremely productive afternoon in Cyrus Greengrass's study learning things about Lucius Malfoy's political methodology that no 12-year-old should probably have known but that Harry filed away with the careful attention of someone who understood that information was the difference between being ready and being reactive. Lucius had moved through the Board of Governors over the summer. Cyrus had expected it and had been prepared, and the result had been a draw. Lucius had raised procedural questions about the Accord's registration, Cyrus had produced the authenticated grimoire and 3 centuries of documented precedent, and the board had done what institutional bodies do when confronted with something they'd rather not decide. They'd tabled it pending further review, which meant it was still coming but on a delayed timeline that gave everyone room to maneuver. "He's patient," Cyrus had said, across the study desk, with his tea going cold beside him. "Don't mistake the delay for retreat." "He's waiting for something to leverage," Harry said. "Something that doesn't exist yet." "Yes." Cyrus looked at him. "Which means he might try to create it." Harry had thought about that for most of July. He was still thinking about it on the first morning of second year when the whispers started, which was fast, even for Hogwarts gossip. They began at breakfast and had completed a full circuit of the castle by the time History of Magic ended at 11. The whispers were about something that had happened over the summer. About something in the castle. About writing appearing on a wall. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." Harry heard it from 3 different sources before lunch and went to find Daphne. She was already in the library. "The Chamber of Secrets," Daphne said, without looking up from the book she'd been reading for approximately the last hour, "is not a myth." Harry sat down. "You knew about it. Father mentioned it. It's in some of the older wizarding histories, not the sanitized ones, the actual ones." She turned a page. "Salazar Slytherin built something beneath the castle before he left. A chamber that housed a monster he intended to use to purge Hogwarts of Muggle-born students." She said it without dramatic inflection, just fact. The prevailing historical view was that it was either sealed or fictional. Given the writing on the wall, it's neither. "No." Astoria appeared from the far end of the stacks, carrying a stack that was too large for her and navigating it with the instinct of someone who had been carrying 2 large stacks of books since before she could read them. She put them down, sat, and said, "I asked one of the second-year Hufflepuffs about the writing. She saw it. It was written in what looked like blood." She was matter-of-fact. "Also, Mrs. Norris was found petrified near the wall." "Petrification suggests Medusa-class magic," Harry said. Both girls looked at him. "There's a category," he said. "Hermione found it in Advanced Defensive Theory last year. Magical creatures whose primary weapon is petrification, gorgons, certain subspecies of serpent, a basilisk," Daphne said. Her voice was very quiet. Harry looked at her. "Salazar Slytherin was a Parselmouth," she said. "It's in the histories. He was known for his affinity with serpents. If he built a chamber and housed a monster there, a basilisk is," she paused. "It's the only thing that makes sense. Nothing else in the known catalogue of magical creatures produces that specific form of petrification. How do you kill a basilisk?" Astoria said, and she asked it the same way she asked everything, directly, practically, because she was Astoria and the gap between identifying a problem and solving it was never longer than absolutely necessary. "The gaze is lethal," Daphne said. "That's the primary weapon. You'd need to avoid direct eye contact." She looked at Harry. "You can hear it." He'd already gotten there. "I'm a Parselmouth," he said. "Yes. Slytherin's monster, in Slytherin's chamber, controlled through Slytherin's language. He processed the alignment of it. Whoever opened the chamber is using Parseltongue to direct it. Or there's a more indirect method," Daphne said. "Petrification rather than death could mean the victims have been seeing the basilisk indirectly. Through water, through a reflection, the reflected gaze paralyses rather than kills. So it's moving through the castle," Harry said. "And something is directing it." "Something," Daphne said, with specific emphasis. "Or someone," Astoria said. They looked at each other across the library table. "We need Hermione," Harry said. "She's going to want to do the research herself," Astoria said, not as a criticism. "Good," Harry said. "Let her. She'll find things we'd miss, and she'll find them faster than us because she cares about being thorough in a way that's genuinely different from, he gestured at Daphne. I'm also thorough, Daphne said. You're strategically thorough. She's comprehensively thorough. It's a different thing. He stood. Also, I trust her. Daphne absorbed this. She's Muggle-born, she said, and it wasn't bigotry, it was a political calculation being voiced aloud so it could be assessed. If someone is targeting Muggle-born students, then she's at risk, Harry said. Which is why she needs to be with us. Astoria was already writing Hermione a note. Hermione arrived at the library 20 minutes later with 3 books under her arm and the expression of someone who had already started thinking about the problem and needed to compare notes immediately. She sat down, looked at what was on the table, and said "Basilisk," before anyone had said anything. Yes, Harry said. I got there last night, she said. The reflected gaze. Mrs. Norris was found near a puddle. She opened the first book. The question is how it's moving through the castle without anyone seeing it directly. Pipes, Astoria said. Everyone looked at her. The plumbing, she said. The castle's original plumbing dates to medieval construction, enormous pipe systems, much larger than modern buildings need, because the original builders were working with magic that required physical conduits for water-based enchantments. If the chamber connects to the castle's pipe system, she tapped her notebook. A basilisk of sufficient size could navigate the entire castle through the pipes. Nobody would see it. They'd only encounter it if it emerged at a specific outlet. Daphne was looking at her sister. When did you learn the castle's architectural history? Second week of first year, Astoria said. Binns was going on about the Goblin rebellions and I started reading the architectural footnotes in the textbook instead. They were much more interesting. I'm going to murder Binns, Daphne said, with the specific feeling of someone who has been missing information through no fault of their own. You can't murder a ghost, Astoria said. He's already dead. Didn't even notice. That sounds exactly like him, Hermione said, and smiled without looking up from her book. Harry was thinking. He was thinking about pipes and Parseltongue and what it meant that something was specifically targeting Muggle-born students in the year that Lucius Malfoy had reintroduced a certain artifact into circulation, because that was the other thing Cyrus had told him, quietly, at the end of July. Lucius had slipped something into a student's belongings at Madame Malkin's. Something old. Something that shouldn't exist in the castle. He hadn't told Cyrus what it was. He hadn't been certain. But Harry had the shape of it now, the way all the pieces sat together, the selection of victims, the timing, the message on the wall with its archaic phrasing, the thing that felt like intent and intelligence and hatred compressed into a century of waiting. He picked up his quill. I need to know everything about Salazar Slytherin's documented possessions, he said. Specifically anything he was known to use as a vessel or container. Anything with preservation magic. Hermione looked up. Why? Because the chamber was sealed, Harry said. If it opened again now, something opened it. And I don't think that something is a person. A pause. A diary, Daphne said. He looked at her. It's in the supplementary histories, she said. Slytherin was documented as having created several enchanted journals, not standard spelled books, actual receptacles. For memory, intent, she stopped. For a piece of something. For a piece of someone, Harry said. The word that none of them said sat in the middle of the table. Hermione said it, because Hermione was the kind of person who named things. Voldemort, she said. A memory of him, Harry said. Young. Before. Strong enough to influence someone, to use them, to open the chamber through them. He looked around the table. Someone has been writing in a diary. And the diary has been writing back. Who has it? Astoria said. Harry thought about the bookshop. Madame Malkin's. A girl with red hair surrounded by second-hand robes and a cauldron full of old-school things and a man crouching beside her to slip something into the stack when no one was watching. Ginny Weasley, he said. He went to Ron that night. This was not a simple thing. Ron Weasley was his friend with the uncomplicated completeness of someone who had decided in the first 20 minutes that Harry was good and had not revised that position since. He was steadfast and funny and genuinely brave in the way that didn't perform itself, and the idea of telling him that his youngest sister had been compromised by a magical artifact specifically designed to corrupt and use her was going to be one of the harder conversations Harry had had. He told Ron in their dormitory, after the others were asleep, quietly and completely. He didn't soften it. He gave Ron every piece of information he had and let him sit with it. Ron sat with it for a long time. Ginny, he said finally, and his voice had done something complicated with the word. She's been quiet. All term. I thought it was just, he stopped. First year. New school. I thought she was adjusting. She's probably not fully aware of what's happening, Harry said. A memory strong enough to possess someone works gradually. She may not know what she's been doing. But she's been going to places she doesn't remember, Harry said. Finding herself in corridors. Waking up in odd locations. He watched Ron's face. Has she said anything like that? Ron's jaw tightened. She said she kept having blackouts, he said. She thought she was just sleeping badly. I told her to eat more breakfast. He pushed both hands through his hair. I told her to eat more bloody breakfast, Harry. You didn't know, Harry said. I should have, Ron. He kept his voice level. You didn't know. Now you do. What do you want to do with that? Ron looked at him. This was one of the things Harry had noticed about Ron over a year of friendship, that when something cut through the noise, Ron's fundamental nature was clear and certain. He was protective. He was loyal. He didn't require things to be his problem before he treated them that way. I want to get the diary away from her, Ron said. And I want to find the chamber and kill whatever's in it. Yes, Harry said. But carefully. With you? Obviously. Ron breathed out. The girls? Daphne and Astoria are working the research angle. They'll have the chamber's location narrowed down by tomorrow. He paused. Hermione is cataloging every water outlet in the castle against the original architectural plans. She borrowed them from the restricted section by being extremely persuasive at a librarian. Ron almost smiled. She terrifies me a bit. Good instinct, Harry said. She's going to be formidable. She already is, Ron said, with the precise tone of someone who was still figuring out his own opinion of this and finding it more positive than expected. He looked at the dark window. Ginny's going to be, he stopped. She's going to feel awful about this. When she knows. When she's free of it, Harry said, she'll need her brother. That's the part you can do. Ron nodded. He had gone to a very specific kind of still, not Daphne's calculating stillness or Harry's measured stillness but Ron's own version, which was the stillness of someone who was frightened and had decided that being frightened was fine as long as it didn't stop you moving. All right, he said. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, Harry agreed. The diary was in Ginny's bag. Harry didn't take it directly, that was Astoria's work, and she did it with the same creative indirection she brought to everything. She found Ginny in the Hufflepuff common room adjacent corridor, sat beside her with the cheerful ease of a second year who simply wanted company, and over the course of 40 minutes of entirely genuine conversation managed to go through Ginny's bag looking for a quill she'd ostensibly lent her the previous week, produced the small black diary, look at it with exactly the right amount of puzzled non-recognition, and put it in her own pocket while handing Ginny back a different quill. She reported this to Harry at dinner with the serenity of someone who had done nothing unusual. She didn't notice? Ron said. She noticed I was in her bag, Astoria said. I told her I was looking for the quill. She believes I was looking for the quill, because I was also genuinely looking for the quill. The diary was just something I happened to find while doing that. You're prepared, Astoria said. We established this. Harry took the diary to the library that evening. He placed it on the table and looked at it. It was small and black and utterly ordinary looking, and it radiated something that he could feel through the bond, not quite darkness, more like pressure. A will that was not ambient magic but directed intent. Something that had been waiting. Daphne pulled her hand back when she reached toward it. Don't touch it, she said. I know, Harry said. It's not just a memory, she said. Harry, I can feel it from here. It has weight, Astoria said. She was sitting across the table with her arms folded, looking at it like it had personally offended her. It has weight. Like someone's inside it. Someone is, Harry said. He looked at the diary. A piece of him. The piece that was 16 and angry and had just learned what he was going to do with his life. He paused. It can think. It can feel. And it's been feeding on Ginny for months. Hermione, who had been listening from behind a large volume on dark artifacts, lowered the book. The destruction of a Horcrux, that's what this is, isn't it? A soul vessel requires a method of destruction that damages the physical container beyond magical repair. She looked at Harry. Something that destroys the object at the structural level before a countercurse can be applied. Basilisk venom, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. It destroys magical objects at the fundamental level, he said. The text Cyrus gave me last summer. Basilisk venom is one of the few substances that can penetrate a Horcrux container because it operates at the magical core rather than the surface. He paused. Which means I need to go into the chamber. We need to go into the chamber, Daphne said immediately. Daphne, don't. She said it with the controlled finality of someone who had been having a version of this argument in her head since yesterday and had already won it. The bond amplifies when we work together. You know that. You've known it since you were 7 years old and Elspeth Greengrass wrote 17 lines about it in a grimoire. You are not going down into a chamber containing 1,000-year-old basilisk by yourself. I'll be with him, Ron said. You're also coming, Daphne said, without breaking eye contact with Harry. But I'm not staying here while you can't come into the chamber, Harry said. The entrance is in Parseltongue. And the basilisk, he thought about it carefully. You can't avoid the gaze in a confined underground space the way you can in open corridors. The reflected gaze paralyses. The direct gaze kills. Down there, the margin for error is, then we're your backup, Astoria said. She said it with the bright decisive quality she used when she'd already worked out what the correct answer was and wanted to move past the argument. We come to the entrance. We wait. If you're not back in 30 minutes, 20, Daphne said. 20 minutes, Astoria amended. Daphne goes for Dumbledore and I do something creative with the pipe system to make navigation considerably less straightforward for a basilisk that is, presumably, trying to leave. Harry looked at Astoria. What exactly would you do with the pipe system? I have some ideas, she said serenely. None of them are fully formed yet, but necessity is inventive. Ron made the sound he made when he was simultaneously impressed and slightly frightened of someone. Harry looked at Daphne. The bond was doing something between them that it did rarely, that amplified, resonant quality that happened when they were both running at full capacity toward the same conclusion from different directions. He could feel her assessment of the risks, running parallel to his own, and they were arriving at the same place. The entrance is in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, Harry said. I'll open it. We go together to the top of the pipe. Ron comes down with me. You two stay at the entrance. 15 minutes, Daphne said. 20, Harry said. 17, Astoria said. Both Harry and Daphne looked at her. Compromise, she said. They went at midnight. The castle at midnight had a different quality than the castle in daylight, not frightening exactly, but more itself, less managed. The portraits slept in their frames. The staircases moved with the ponderous deliberateness of things freed from performance. Harry led them through the third floor and down to the second and through the corridor that curved toward Myrtle's bathroom with the certainty of someone who had been planning a route for 3 days. Myrtle herself was in her usual location, which was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. She looked at 5 students appearing in her bathroom at midnight with the expression she reserved for things she found more interesting than being dead. "Harry Potter," she said. "Myrtle," he said. "We need the entrance." She drifted toward the sink. "I knew there was something," she said. "In the pipes. I could hear it." She looked at Harry with large, sad, genuinely perceptive eyes. "It's terrible in there." "I know," he said. "You should be careful." "I will be." He looked at her properly, not past her, the way most people looked past Myrtle, but at her. "Thank you." She looked startled. Then she retreated to her trap, and Harry turned to the sink. The entrance responded to Parseltongue exactly as he'd expected it would. The snake engraved on the tap moved under his voice, the basin split and rotated, and the pipe yawned open below them with a breath of cold darkness and something old. Daphne stood at the edge, looking down. Harry could feel everything she wasn't saying. It was all in the bond, that careful warmth pressed against something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it, the specific anxiety of someone who needed to be in 2 places at once and knew they couldn't be. He looked at her. 17 minutes, he said. Something crossed her face that was rare, unmanaged, quick, genuine. 12, she said, which was not a negotiation but something else. 15, he said. Come back, she said. Just that. Yes, he said. He dropped into the pipe. The slide was long and cold and absolute, and Ron was a half-second behind him, and they landed in a dark corridor that smelled of standing water and stone that hadn't seen light in centuries. Harry lit his wand, the holly wand, warm in his hand, that particular hum of recognition, and looked down the corridor. Large. Stone. The bones of things on the ground that had not been moving for a very long time. Right, Ron said, from beside him, in a voice that was admirably steady. Big chamber then. Yes, Harry said. He was already listening, not with his ears but with something deeper, the part of him that heard the particular frequency of serpent speech whether it was spoken or simply present. It's ahead. Moving. Can it smell us? Yes, Harry said. So we move first. He didn't wait for the basilisk to come to them. That was the thing he'd worked out from 3 days of thinking, that a defensive posture in a confined space against a creature whose primary weapon operated at the speed of sight was a losing proposition. The only position that worked was the one where he controlled when the encounter happened. He moved fast, the corridor opening into the main chamber, a vast space, greenlit from some source he couldn't immediately identify, with enormous carved faces of a man who had been young and certain and brilliant and wrong running along the walls, and in the center of it a great stone construction that was almost an altar and almost a cage and almost a door. And Ginny, lying on the floor beside it. And standing over Ginny, holding her wand with the ease of long ownership, a boy that Harry recognized from no portrait or history but knew immediately, young, dark-haired, handsome in a way that had something cold behind it, wearing robes that were wrong for any decade Harry knew. Tom Riddle. He was 16 years old and he had the absolute confidence of someone who had just won something, and he looked at Harry with the specific pleasure of a chess player who has been waiting for the most interesting piece to arrive. Harry Potter, he said. At last. Tom Riddle, Harry said. Or do you prefer Voldemort? The name landed differently in this chamber, not the way names land in the world above, where they carry the weight of fear by proxy. Here, it landed with its actual weight, which was the weight of a choice made by a boy who had decided that what he was born was not what he intended to remain. Tom Riddle's expression sharpened with interest. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "You're a memory in a diary," Harry said. "You're very clever and very dangerous, and you've been feeding on a 12-year-old girl for months, which tells me everything about how desperate you actually are." He moved toward Ginny without looking away from Tom. "I'm going to wake her up and we're going to leave." "The basilisk will stop you," Tom said pleasantly. "No," Harry said. "It won't." He said something in Parseltongue. "Not a command, something more fundamental than a command, the way you talk to something that shares a frequency, the way you acknowledge something on its own terms before you ask anything of it." The hiss of it filled the chamber and rolled up the stone walls, and somewhere in the dark water at the edges of the room something very large went still. Tom Riddle stared at him. "You're a Parselmouth," he said. And now the pleasure in his voice had an edge of something else, not quite fear, but the thing before fear, which was the recognition that the situation had a variable that hadn't been accounted for. "Yes," Harry said. He crouched beside Ginny, checked her pulse, present, steady, she was unconscious but breathing, and looked up at Tom. "She's alive. Which means you haven't finished whatever you're doing. You need her." "I need her energy," Tom confirmed, with the frankness of someone who had decided that honesty was more interesting than deception at this point. "She's been feeding the diary for months. Every memory, every fear, every secret she wrote in my pages. Enough to give me this," he gestured at himself. "Enough to sustain a presence here. But not enough," Harry said. "Not enough to fully manifest. You're still just a projection." Tom tilted his head. "For now." "Send the basilisk," Harry said. Tom blinked. "You were going to," Harry said. "So send it. Let's resolve the question of whether I can handle it rather than dancing around the answer." He stood up. "I'd rather know now." For a long moment, Tom Riddle looked at Harry Potter, at the boy who had walked into the chamber at midnight with the comfortable directness of someone who had never learned to be cautious about the right things, who spoke Parseltongue with a frequency that made century-old monsters pause, who had spent 5 years being educated by people who understood old magic better than most of the wizarding world and wore that education like a second skin. Tom said something in Parseltongue. The water at the edges of the chamber erupted. Harry had already closed his eyes. Not from fear, from strategy, from the decision made 3 days ago about how this encounter would go. He didn't need his eyes in this chamber. He had other senses, the bond, humming steady at the back of his awareness with Daphne's focused attention like a compass needle, the wand, warm and certain in his hand, and the Parseltongue frequency of the basilisk itself, which was the most useful thing of all. He could hear exactly where it was. He moved. Not toward it, sideways, circling, tracking it with the Parseltongue awareness the way a blind fighter tracks by sound, and he sent a wandless burst of air at the chamber's water channels that redirected the flow and gave the basilisk a disorienting current to navigate, and while it was navigating he was already moving again, different angle, keeping the vast head guessing about where Harry was relative to where Harry had been. The basilisk was enormous. It was also, underneath its lethality, a creature, ancient and powerful but constrained by the same instincts that constrained all creatures, the same fundamental patterns of predator and prey. Harry didn't engage those patterns. He sidestepped them. He spoke to it. In Parseltongue, low and continuous, not commanding but inviting. Something that said, "I see you, I know what you are, I'm not asking you to stop being what you are, I'm asking you to consider whether the boy in the expensive robes actually deserves your loyalty or whether he's simply been the only voice available." The basilisk slowed. Tom Riddle said something sharp and commanding. The basilisk moved again, faster. Harry reached into the bond. He hadn't done this deliberately before. He'd felt it work passively, the amplification when they were in close proximity, but he'd never reached for it with specific intent, never pulled on it like a resource. He pulled now, and what came back was immediate and enormous, Daphne's focused clarity and Astoria's fierce warmth, both of them above in the bathroom entrance, both of them fully present and entirely his, and the magic it gave him was not 3 times what he carried alone. It was a different thing entirely, a compound thing, a thing that had no word yet because the last time it had existed was before the statute of secrecy. He opened his eyes. Not toward the basilisk. Toward Tom Riddle. Tom had Ginny's wand. What Tom did not have was his own wand, which meant what Tom did not have was any defense against the thing Harry did next, which was reach for the diary on the stone altar beside Ginny with every ounce of the amplified bond magic he was currently running and drive the basilisk's shed fang. He'd felt it underfoot in the dark water, long and curved and lethal with venom, straight through the leather cover. The sound the diary made was not a sound a book should be able to make. Tom Riddle screamed. It was not a human sound exactly. It was the sound of something that had been compressed into 14 square inches of enchanted parchment and had been pretending, for months, that it was more than that, and was now confronting the gap between the pretense and the reality. He came apart from the edges inward, his projection dissolving, and Harry watched him go without looking away, because Tom Riddle deserved to be watched. The last thing Tom's face did before it disappeared was look at Harry with something that was rage and something that was, underneath the rage, afraid. Good, Harry thought. The basilisk, freed from the compulsion that had been directing it, retreated. Harry could feel it in the Parseltongue frequency, a kind of subsidence, a long creature returning to long quiet, retreating into the deep pipe system that ran under the castle and finding its way back to whatever chamber it had slept in for 100 years. He let it go. It had not chosen to be here. It had not chosen Tom Riddle. It had been used the way most things Voldemort touched had been used. He crouched beside Ginny. Her color was better already, the diary's destruction was releasing her. Ginny, he said, quietly. Her eyes opened. They were unfocused for a moment, then sharpened. She looked at him, then at the chamber, then at the destroyed diary on the altar. Her face did something complicated and private that he looked away from, because she deserved that much. Harry, she said. Can you stand? I think so. She sat up slowly. I didn't know I was, I know, he said. We can talk about it later. Can you stand? She stood. He put his hand under her elbow and she didn't shake it off, and they found Ron in the antechamber, wide-eyed and gripping his wand with both hands and a considerable amount of adrenaline. Ron looked at Ginny and said her name the way brothers say sisters' names when they'd feared the alternative, and Ginny walked into his arms and Ron held her in the uncomplicated direct way that was the best thing about him, and Harry gave them 30 seconds before he said, "We need to move." They came up through the pipe into Myrtle's bathroom to find all 3 girls there, Daphne at the pipe entrance, composed, not moving, but with the quality of someone who had been about to move. Astoria beside her. Hermione at the door, who had apparently arrived uninvited but had brought a complete set of notes on basilisk treatment protocols, which Harry decided was the single most useful thing she could have done. Daphne looked at Harry. He was damp from the chamber water. His robes had a tear from the basilisk's tail catching his shoulder, not a bite, not venom, just the mechanical fact of being near something enormous and moving. He had a fang still in his hand that was going to need very careful disposal. "You're injured," she said. "Scratch," he said. "That's not a scratch. It's a significant scratch." He held her gaze. "I'm fine, Daphne." She looked at him for a long moment with the bond running between them at full pitch, and she could feel that he was fine. She could feel it in the same way she'd felt the whole sequence in the chamber, not the details but the shape of it, the direction, the outcome, and she didn't argue further, she just reached forward and took the basilisk fang from his hand and put it into the container Hermione was already holding open. "Good thinking," Harry said, to Hermione. "Lead-lined," Hermione said. "The venom will stay contained." She looked at the fang with the expression she wore in the presence of genuinely new information. "Is that from the basilisk?" "Yes." "Is it dead?" "No," Harry said. "I sent it back." A pause. "You sent the basilisk back," Hermione said. "It hadn't chosen to be here," Harry said. It was being used. Hermione looked at him with an expression that contained about 4 different assessments happening simultaneously and emerging as something that was simply respect, clean and direct. Right, she said. Right, okay. Ron came up through the pipe with Ginny, and Astoria was already beside Ginny before she'd fully found her footing, not asking questions, not explaining anything, just there, with the warm steady presence that was Astoria's particular gift, her hand on Ginny's arm and her voice saying something quiet. Ginny was 12 years old and she'd had months of herself used by a piece of a dead man's soul, and she was shaking, and she needed her brother and she needed someone who was just warm without agenda, and she had both. Harry watched this and thought about the long game. About Lucius Malfoy at Madame Malkin's, slipping a diary into a stack of second-hand books. About the Board of Governors letter in September and the procedural challenge in the summer and the patient institutional methodology that Cyrus had described. About what it meant that Lucius had done this, had introduced a piece of Voldemort into a 12-year-old girl as what? A test? A weapon? A distraction? He didn't have the answer yet. But he had the Fong, contained and labeled in Hermione's lead-lined box. And he had the diary's destruction as documented fact. And he had 5 witnesses. Dumbledore in the morning, he said. Daphne nodded. With a written account. Signed, dated, and delivered through the formal channel so it's on record. And the Fong as evidence, Hermione said. And Ginny's testimony, Astoria said, still beside Ginny. Ginny looked up at the word testimony, and Astoria met her eyes steadily. You didn't do anything wrong. You were used. Those are different things, and the record should say so. Ginny looked at the group of them, Harry and Ron and Hermione and both Greengrass sisters, standing in a bathroom at midnight with basilisk evidence and strategic plans and, in Ron's case, a very strong desire to have some of Hermione's chocolate that she kept in her pocket for emergencies. You all came, Ginny said. Obviously, Astoria said, as if this were the simplest sentence in the world. Ginny looked at Harry last. Thank you, she said. He didn't say it was nothing the way people say when they mean the opposite. He said, you're welcome, and meant it simply, and then he pushed open the bathroom door and led them all back into the castle. Dumbledore received their account the next morning in an office that smelled of old paper and something sweet, behind a desk that had seen more significant conversations than most courtrooms. He listened to the full account without interruption, his eyes moving between Harry and Daphne and Hermione with the attention of someone who was receiving information he had expected and hoped not to receive simultaneously. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, the diary. Destroyed, Harry said. The basilisk. Returned to the chamber. It won't attack again without direction. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes that were doing several things at once. You spoke to it, he said. Yes. In Parseltongue. Yes. And it obeyed. I didn't command it, Harry said. I reasoned with it. There's a difference. He held the headmaster's gaze. The diary contained a piece of Voldemort's soul. It was directing the basilisk. I destroyed the diary. The direction stopped. The basilisk had no more reason to be in the castle. Dumbledore's expression moved through several things. At the end of them it settled on something that was, Harry thought, genuine, something that was not strategy or management but simply an old man confronting a boy who was something he hadn't accounted for. You are very like your mother, Dumbledore said finally. More than I expected. I'll take that, Harry said. Dumbledore turned to the evidence, the lead-lined box, the written account, signed by all 5 students, with Hermione's timeline and Daphne's legal phrasing and Astoria's architectural notes and Ron's eyewitness testimony appended. He looked at it for a moment. There is a matter, he said, of who introduced the diary to the school. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The evidence is in Daphne's account, Harry said. The specific characteristics of the compulsion magic, the timing of Ginny's deterioration, the method of delivery, we've documented the chain. He paused. It's circumstantial. Yes, Dumbledore said. But it's enough to raise formal questions, Daphne said, through the appropriate channels. Which I believe you have access to. Dumbledore looked at Daphne Greengrass with the expression of someone encountering a 12-year-old making a measured institutional chess move and not quite knowing whether to be amused or alarmed. The Board of Governors, he said. They've been asking questions about the Accord, Daphne said. At Lucius Malfoy's prompting. I thought it might be useful if they were also answering questions, at yours. The silence that followed was the quiet of a perfectly executed move landing on a board. Your father taught you that, Dumbledore said. My father taught me a great deal, Daphne said. So did the last 4 years. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Between them, unspoken, was the shape of a larger game, the one that was going to stretch past school, past childhood, past the Chamber of Secrets and the Board of Governors and Lucius Malfoy's patient institutional campaigns. Harry was 12 years old and he knew the game was long. He wasn't frightened of long. Lucius Malfoy, Dumbledore said, will be removed from the Board of Governors. Good, Harry said. This won't end his interest in the matter. I know, Harry said. But it costs him something. And every time he moves, it should cost him something. He stood. Thank you, Professor. He walked out of Dumbledore's office into the morning corridor, and the castle was bright and loud with students going to breakfast, and Ron was waiting at the bottom of the spiral staircase with a piece of toast he'd saved from the Great Hall. Did it work? Ron said. Malfoy's off the board, Harry said. Ron handed him the toast. Good, he said simply. Hungry? Starving, Harry said. They walked to breakfast, and the castle moved around them in its complicated morning way, and somewhere far below in the deep pipe system of a 1,000-year-old building, something very old and very large curled in the dark and was still. Chapter 5, Blood and Contracts. Third year arrived and departed in the way that years do when they contain too much, in a blur of significant moments that only arrange themselves into a coherent shape afterward, when you have distance enough to see the pattern. The significant things in third year were, Sirius Black escaping Azkaban, a new defense professor who was the first competent one Harry had encountered and turned out to be a werewolf, a time-turner that Hermione used with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that 24 hours was not sufficient, and an evening in the Shrieking Shack that ended with the truth about Peter Pettigrew, which was a truth so large and long delayed that it rearranged several things Harry had understood about his own history. Sirius was freed. That was the important part. Not through the Ministry was still a bureaucratic machine that operated on established narrative rather than evidence, and the established narrative of Sirius Black's guilt was 12 years old and deeply embedded. He was freed through other means, a hippogriff, a time-turner, and 3 people moving with coordinated precision through a moonlit night while a transformed werewolf kept everyone's attention occupied in the wrong direction. Harry had planned it in 40 minutes with Daphne and Hermione in the hospital wing while Ron's leg set and Astoria kept watch at the door, and the planning had the quality of something that had been practiced for years, not this specific plan, but the general architecture of it, the three-way thinking that Harry and Daphne and Astoria had been doing since they were children in a workroom with a 3-colored blackboard. Sirius flew away on Buckbeak into a sky that was doing something spectacular with clouds and moonlight, and Harry stood on the tower balcony and felt something release in his chest that had been held taut for years. Not grief, exactly. More like the slow acknowledgement that the loss of his parents had a shape that was larger than he'd been told, that there had been people who loved them, who had been wrongly destroyed by that love, and that one of those people was now free. He didn't cry then either. He was getting better at understanding the difference between things that warranted tears and things that warranted the specific clean feeling of a wrong being partially righted. The partially was important. Peter Pettigrew had escaped. The Ministry had declined to revise their position. Sirius was free in the practical sense, on the run, unable to return publicly, not legally exonerated, and Harry carried that partial in his chest through the end of term and into the summer as a specific kind of unfinished business. Fourth year was when the Wisengamot came for the bond. The letter arrived in July, 3 weeks into summer. It was formal, official, and had the particular smell of institutional parchment that had been enchanted to resist alteration, the ministry's way of making documents feel permanent. Cyrus read it at the breakfast table, passed it to Isadora, who read it and put it down beside her tea with the precise placement of someone controlling their hands. Petition for dissolution, Cyrus said. He said it without inflection. Harry was 14. He had grown into his height over the last year and had the look of someone who was going to be considerable when they finished growing, not large, but built with a kind of density that came from years of Quidditch and wandless magic practice and the particular physical confidence of someone who had never been told to make themselves smaller. He read the letter over Isadora's shoulder. The petition had been filed by a coalition of 7 ancient houses. He recognized 3 of the names as families with documented Death Eater connections, 2 more as grey-aligned houses who owed Lucius Malfoy political debts, and 2 that were apparently genuinely concerned with what the petition called the improper activation of a pre-statute blood contract in violation of contemporary wizarding ordinance. The filing argued that the Greengrass Accord's triad provision had never been formally registered with the Wisengamot as required by the Blood Magic Regulation Act of 1847, and therefore any bond arising from it lacked legal standing. 1847, Harry said. Yes, Cyrus said. The Accord was created in 1463 and supplemented in 1692. Harry set the letter down. The 1847 Regulation Act has a grandfather clause for all pre-existing blood contracts. Yes. Which they know. Yes. Cyrus picked up his tea. The argument isn't designed to win on its technical merits. It's designed to get the bond in front of a Wisengamot session where it can be debated, documented, and made politically visible in a context that Lucius can control. He wants the narrative, Daphne said. She was across the table, very still. He wants the Wisengamot on record discussing the bond as a problem. Even if the petition fails, the record of the debate becomes something he can point to. He's building a file, Harry said. Over 7 years, Isadora said. He's been building it since Diagon Alley. She looked at her daughters and at Harry with an expression that was as close to troubled as she ever looked. He's patient and he's thorough and he has the political capital to sustain this for as long as he needs to. Then we go, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. To the Wisengamot. He looked around the table. They want the bond in front of them? Fine. Let's put it in front of them properly. He looked at Cyrus. Who argues the case? The head of the bonded house, traditionally, Cyrus said. Which would be me. Or the bonded parties themselves, Harry said. If they're of sufficient age and competence to speak for themselves. A pause. Harry, Isadora said. You're 14. Yes, he said. And Daphne's 16 and Astoria's 14 and we have been studying the legal foundations of this bond for 7 years and we know it better than any advocate Lucius Malfoy can put in front of us. He kept his voice level and certain. The petition treats us as objects, things that happen to be bonded, things to be legally processed. I'd rather we were people who chose to stand in front of the Wisengamot and make that very clear. Cyrus was quiet for a long moment, in the specific way he went quiet when he was taking someone's measure rather than thinking through logistics. The Wisengamot allows bonded parties to speak in their own defense, he said. It's an old provision, rarely invoked, because most bonded parties in historical cases were not, he paused. Capable. We're capable, Daphne said. Cyrus looked at her. Then at Astoria, who had not said anything yet and was looking at Harry with an expression that was doing something Harry had learned to read, that particular brightness that meant she'd already mapped 3 steps beyond the current conversation. Yes, Cyrus said. You are. He set down his tea. There is one condition. Name it, Harry said. You let me prepare you. He looked at all three of them. 6 weeks. Full preparation. Wizengamot procedure, blood magic legal history, argument structure, and counter-argument for everything Lucius's advocates will raise. He paused. No shortcuts. We don't take shortcuts, Astoria said, slightly injured. You, Cyrus said, take scenic routes that occasionally arrive at the right destination through methods that are difficult to explain to oversight committees. He looked at her with an expression that contained, deeply buried, a significant amount of affection. In the Wizengamot, you take the direct road. Astoria considered this. Understood, she said. 6 weeks, Harry said. When is the session? Cyrus picked up the letter. September 3rd. First week of term, Daphne said. Yes. Which means we walk into the Wizengamot before we walk back into Hogwarts, Harry said. And everyone in the school finds out the result on the same day. He thought about that. The story that would spread, 3 Hogwarts students, 3 different houses, standing in the Wizengamot in September in defense of an ancient bond. The narrative that would write itself without any help from any of them. Lucius had wanted the bond made politically visible. Harry decided to be very visible indeed. 6 weeks with Cyrus Greengrass as your teacher was a specific and comprehensive experience. He worked them mornings through evenings with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had grown up understanding that knowledge was infrastructure, and that infrastructure built under pressure held better than infrastructure built in leisure. He started with Wizengamot procedure, the formal rules of address, the structure of a petition hearing, the specific order in which arguments and counter-arguments were presented, the way the 77-seat chamber actually functioned politically versus how it was supposed to function. The procedure is the trap, he told them on the first day, across the study desk with 3 chairs on one side and himself on the other, his notes spread between them. Lucius knows the procedure better than most of the sitting members. He'll use it to control pacing, to interrupt at advantageous moments, to force you into reactive positions. Your task is to know it well enough that his procedural moves don't surprise you. And when they do? Harry said. They won't, Daphne said, not looking up from the text she was annotating. They might, Harry said. Then you pause, Cyrus said. You don't fill silence with noise. You think, you decide, and then you speak. The members respect deliberate speech. They've sat through enough rushed, defensive arguments to find the alternative striking. Harry wrote this down. The legal history was Daphne's domain. She took it apart with the systematic precision that she brought to everything she genuinely cared about, building a map of blood magic contract law from the pre-statute era through the 1847 Act and everything after, marking every precedent that bore on the accord, every case where a similar challenge had failed or succeeded and why. She did it with the intensity of someone who had been waiting for this specific project, who had known it was coming for 7 years and was finally in a room where she could do something about it. Harry watched her work and thought about what the hat had said about anger being fuel. Daphne's fuel was different from his, where his ran hot and forward, hers ran cold and precise, a different temperature but no less powerful, and he thought that was the compound magic working long before any of them cast a spell. 3 different kinds of fire, making something that burned in a way no single one of them could. Astoria handled the counter-arguments. This was, everyone agreed, the perfect assignment for her, not because she was the weakest logician in the room but because she thought sideways, and the most dangerous arguments were never the obvious ones. She spent 2 weeks building the most comprehensive version of the opposition's case she could construct, pulling from legal records and political histories and the specific known positions of each Wizengamot member who had signed on to the petition. At the end of 2 weeks she presented it across the study table and they all sat with it. It's good, Harry said. It's what they'll actually argue, Astoria said. Or close enough. She tapped the 3rd section. This is the one that worries me. The welfare argument. Daphne read it. They're going to claim the bond is harmful to us. Specifically to you and me, Astoria said. They're going to argue that we were children, that we couldn't consent to a permanent bond, that the accord should be invalidated on the grounds that it was activated before we had legal magical majority. She looked at Harry. And they're going to be careful not to say explicitly that the problem is that you're a half-blood raised by muggles, because they can't say that in the Wizengamot without consequences. But that's what they mean, and everyone in the room will know what they mean. So we make them say it explicitly, Harry said. Astoria met his eyes. If the welfare argument is the strongest thing they have, Harry said, we flip it. We stand in that chamber as three people who are clearly not harmed, we demonstrate that, we make them look at us and see it, and then we invite them to explain what specifically they believe is harmful, and we don't let them be vague about it. That's aggressive, Cyrus said. Yes, Harry said. It could alienate the middle members. The ones who haven't committed to either side. Or it could crystallize the question, Harry said. Make it so clear what the petition is actually about that the middle members have to decide which side of that line they're on. He looked at Cyrus. You said Lucius wants the narrative. This takes the narrative and turns it inside out. Instead of the bond being the question, the prejudice becomes the question. Cyrus was quiet for a long moment. Your mother, he said finally, would have argued exactly this way. Harry absorbed this. It was the first time Cyrus had made that comparison directly, and it landed differently than Dumbledore's version had, not as a compliment managed from distance, but as a specific observation from a man who had known Lily Potter's work, or at least known of it, and was drawing a line between her and her son with the seriousness of someone who meant it. How do you know how she argued? Harry said. I saw her in front of the Wizengamot once, Cyrus said. 1980, a hearing on Muggle-born rights during the First War. She was 20 years old and she went at it exactly like this, not defensively, offensively, making the other side explain itself until the explanation became its own condemnation. He picked up his tea. She didn't win the vote. But the record of what she said that day shaped the debate for a decade. He paused. You have her eyes and her strategic instincts and you keep them both behind the same kind of stillness she had. I've thought about it since Diagon Alley. Harry looked at the table. The thing about grief at 14, after years of practice with it, was that it had learned to arrive gently rather than suddenly. It came in through observations like this one, through specific facts, and it sat with you rather than knocking you over. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Cyrus said. Use it. They arrived at the Ministry of Magic on September 3rd in robes that Isadora had chosen with the specific precision she brought to things that mattered, dark, formal, well-made without being ostentatious, the kind of clothes that said we belong here without needing to announce it. Cyrus had briefed them on the chamber layout, the composition of the current session, which members were friendly and which hostile and which could be moved. He had given them everything he had. Walking through the ministry's atrium, Harry felt the bond running at a frequency he recognized, the compound quality, all three of them in close proximity with shared intent, the magic that Elspeth Greengrass had called moments of magical intensity and that Harry had come to think of as simply what they were when they were fully present to each other and to a task. Daphne was on his left, a fraction closer than she usually stood, not touching, but close enough that the bond between them had a warmth that was tactile as much as magical. She had her notes in a leather folder that she was not carrying like notes but like something she already knew so thoroughly that the folder was just form. Astoria was on his right, and she had done something Harry hadn't seen her do before, she had gone quiet. Not the excited and contained quiet she sometimes achieved, but a genuine deep quiet, like everything in her had gathered itself toward a single point. She looked, walking through the ministry atrium, like someone who was about to do something she had been preparing for her entire life, which was precisely true. Ready? Harry said. Since I was 7, Astoria said, without moving her eyes from the corridor ahead. The Wizengamot chamber was circular and tiered and smelled of old wood and something like ozone, the residue of decades of magic used in argument. The 77 seats ranged around the walls in 3 ascending tiers, most of them occupied, and the 3 seats below on the floor of the chamber, the respondent seats, were waiting. The petitioner's advocate sat on the opposing bench. 3 of them, senior legal practitioners, grey-robed, with the settled confidence of people who had done this many times. Harry scanned them without looking like he was scanning them and identified the lead advocate immediately, older man, heavy-set, with the quality of a person who had learned the Wisengamot's rhythm so thoroughly he could use procedural moves like reflexes. Lucius Malfoy sat in the gallery rather than on the floor. He wasn't formally part of the petition, of course, because his formal connection to anything was always carefully managed. He sat in the 3rd tier with the patient stillness of someone who had arranged things exactly as he wanted them and was content to observe. He was wearing robes that were expensive enough to look simple, and he watched Harry take his seat on the floor of the chamber with pale eyes that gave nothing away. Harry looked at him once, directly, and then looked forward. Chief Warlock Millicent Bagnold opened the session with the formal language of procedure, and then the lead advocate rose. He was good. Harry had expected good and was not disappointed. The argument opened with the technical legal challenge, the 1847 registration requirement, presented cleanly, with 3 precedents cited correctly and 1 cited slightly incorrectly in a way that was subtle enough to be charitable or deliberate depending on your perspective. Harry wrote a single note on his parchment. Daphne, beside him, had already marked the same error. The technical argument was done in 15 minutes. Then the welfare argument. It was more careful than Astoria had written it, which meant it was more sophisticated, which meant their counter needed to be adjusted. Harry listened to it with the attention of someone not reacting but filing, taking each element, placing it, building the response architecture as the argument unfolded. He could feel Daphne doing the same thing. He could feel Astoria very still and very sharp beside him. The advocate concluded. The chamber was quiet in the way chambers go quiet when they're waiting to see what comes next. Chief Warlock Bagnold said, "The respondents have requested the right of personal address. This is granted under the provision of objection," the lead advocate said, immediately. The respondents include minor children who should be represented by their legal guardians rather than the provision, Bagnold said, with the particular authority of someone who had been a chief warlock for 23 years and had a very limited tolerance for interruption, applies to all bonded parties of sufficient magical majority. Harry Potter achieved magical majority under the 1843 Enhanced Majority Act at age 13, following his certification of advanced wandless competency. Daphne Greengrass is 16 and legally of age. Astoria Greengrass achieved the same enhanced majority provision as Mr. Potter at age 12. She looked at the advocate with an expression that was technically neutral. The objection is noted and overruled. Mr. Potter, you may address the chamber. Harry stood. He had thought about how to begin this. He had written several versions and discarded them all because they started from the wrong place. They started with defense, with explanation, with the implicit posture of someone who was justifying themselves. That was not the posture he wanted. "My name is Harry Potter," he said. "I'm 14 years old. I've been in a blood bond with Daphne and Astoria Greengrass for 7 years." He let that sit for a moment. When the petition talks about the bond as a problem to be legally resolved, what it's actually asking is whether the 3 of us are a problem. So I'd like to address that directly. He could feel the chamber's attention sharpen. Not the procedural attention of people following an argument, actual attention, the kind that settles on something unexpected. The technical legal argument about the 1847 Act has a simple answer which I'll let Daphne provide, because she knows it better than I do and it's her house's bond. My contribution to this session is different. He looked around the chamber, at the 3 tiers of faces, at the mix of sympathy and hostility and careful neutrality. The petition includes a welfare argument. It argues that we were children when the bond activated, that we couldn't consent, that the bond may have harmed us. I'm not going to argue against the welfare argument. I'm going to invite the petition's advocates to support it. A murmur ran through the tiers. "Tell me specifically," Harry said, "what harm has occurred. Not theoretically, actually. Daphne Greengrass is sitting at this table. She is 16 years old. She is, by the academic record, among the top students of her year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. She has been happy. She has had a family that loves her. She has had the bond for 7 years, and I would invite you to find evidence that it has damaged her in any measurable sense. He paused. Astoria Greengrass is 14. Same record. Same evidence. I could speak similarly for myself. He kept his voice level and moved his gaze to the petitioner's bench. So the welfare argument has to be specific. What, precisely, do you believe has harmed us? Because I'll notice that the petition doesn't actually name a harm, it describes the bond as potentially harmful, structurally problematic, historically irregular. Those are legal phrases that mean something very specific, which is that the authors of this petition could not identify an actual harm and so described a theoretical one instead. He sat down. The chamber was doing the particular kind of quiet that was not absence of sound but presence of thinking. The lead advocate was already standing. The harm, he said, with the careful precision of someone who had seen where this was going and had prepared for it, is that the bond was activated without the parties' understanding of what they were activating. I'd like to address that, Astoria said, and stood. She didn't look at Cyrus for permission. She stood with the quiet that had been gathering in her all morning, and she spoke with the clarity of someone who had spent 14 years figuring out exactly what she thought and had arrived. I was 7 years old, she said. I activated the bond because my sister dared me to kiss a stranger on the cheek, and because I wanted to avoid a month of venomous tentacula maintenance, which I maintain was a reasonable position. A murmur of something that was almost laughter ran through the upper tiers. She didn't smile at it. But here is what's also true. I grew up in a family that explained the bond to me, completely, honestly, without simplification, before I was 8. I have had 7 years to understand what I activated. I have had 7 years to decide what I think about it. And I am standing here today, which is not something a harmed person typically does in defense of the thing that harmed them. She sat back down. Miss Greengrass, the advocate said, the question isn't whether you feel harmed. Children in harmful situations often don't recognize, with respect, Daphne said, and she was already standing, and she had her folder open, and her voice had the quality Harry had heard 1,000 times at their library table, the voice of someone laying out an argument like building blocks, exact and level and relentless. If the chamber's concern is genuinely for the welfare of minors in blood bonds, I can provide 14 cases from Wisengamot records between 1730 and 1901 in which minors were party to activated blood contracts, and the chamber's standard was informed consent at the point of maturity rather than consent at the point of activation, since the nature of blood magic is that it activates before conscious decision-making is possible in most cases. She looked at the lead advocate. In 12 of those 14 cases, the bond was upheld. In the 2 cases where it was dissolved, the grounds were documented harm, not theoretical harm. Actual, specific, evidenced harm. She closed the folder. I would be interested to know which of those 14 precedents the petition's advocates believe is materially different from the present case, and why. The advocate looked at his notes. He was good and he had answers, and they went back and forth for 20 minutes, real legal argument, specific, referenced, the kind of exchange that required both sides to be sharp and prepared, and they were, and Harry watched it with the specific satisfaction of watching someone do the thing they were built for and doing it without any concession to fear. When the advocate cited the precedent he'd cited incorrectly in his opening, Daphne stopped him mid-sentence. Thackeray versus the Knott Estate, 1882, she said. The judgment in that case upheld the bond on grounds of mutual benefit, not on the registration provisions the advocate has cited. The registration requirement was raised and dismissed in the lower hearing. It did not form part of the final judgment. She looked at the advocate with blue eyes that were completely calm. I have the full transcript if the chamber would like it entered into evidence. She produced it from her folder. Harry thought, she's had that transcript for 3 weeks. The session went to recess. In the corridor outside the chamber, Cyrus stood with them while the advocates conferred at the far end. He said nothing for a moment. He had the expression of a man who had spent 6 weeks preparing 3 teenagers for the most significant legal challenge his family had faced in a generation and was experiencing the specific feeling of watching preparation become performance. "The Thackeray transcript," he said finally. "I found it in the 4th week," Daphne said. "I thought he might use that precedent incorrectly. It's been cited incorrectly in 4 other hearings. You didn't tell me you had it." "I wanted to see if I was right about where he'd use it," she said. "I was." Cyrus looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Harry had seen him do exactly twice before. He pulled his daughter into a hug that was brief and certain and entirely private, and Daphne stood in it with her eyes closed for exactly the time it lasted. Astoria caught Harry's eye over her sister's shoulder. She was smiling, not the gap-toothed grin of a 7-year-old but something that was older and just as warm and considerably more fierce. "We've got this," she said with it. He smiled back. The vote was 51 to 26 to dismiss the petition. Harry had expected the margin to be closer. The 26 votes in favor of dissolution were the ones they'd known were coming: the Death Eater families, the houses with debts to Lucius, 2 genuine welfare-concerned members who had been persuaded by the advocates' framing and were not persuadable by any argument Harry could have made in the time available. The 51 were the ones that mattered. Several of them were houses that had been neutral, that had been watching the bond question without committing, and had walked into the session undecided and walked out in favor. That was Daphne's legal argument, Harry thought, and Astoria's presence, and whatever it was that the 3 of them projected when they stood in a room together with full intent, that compound quality that had no name yet. In the gallery, Lucius Malfoy stood when the result was announced, and he straightened his robes, and he walked out of the chamber without looking at any of them. Harry watched him go. He thought about what Cyrus had said. Patient. Dangerous precisely because he works through institutions and law. This was a loss for Lucius, a public one, a documented one, but it was a loss he'd absorbed before and would absorb again, and somewhere he was already calculating the next move. Harry would be ready for the next move. He turned from the gallery to find Ron standing at the chamber door. Ron had apparently arrived at some point during the recess, slightly windswept in a way that suggested he'd moved quickly from wherever he'd been, and he was looking at Harry with the expression he wore when Harry had done something that Ron thought was excellent but didn't quite have words for. "How long have you been standing there?" Harry said. "Since Daphne pulled out the transcript," Ron said. "Hermione wrote me a letter about the hearing. I thought I should be here." He paused. "In case." "In case what?" Ron shrugged. "In case you needed someone to be here." Harry looked at him. This was Ron Weasley in its essential form, not an ally you had to ask, not someone who made their support contingent on being thanked for it, just a person who showed up because showing up was what you did for people you'd decided on. "Thanks," Harry said. 51 to 26, Ron said. "That's larger than expected." "Yeah." Ron looked at Daphne and Astoria, who were standing with Cyrus and Isadora at the far end of the corridor. "She really had that transcript the whole time?" 3 weeks, Harry said. Ron shook his head slowly. "I would not want to be cross-examined by Daphne Greengrass." "No," Harry agreed. "You really wouldn't." Hermione appeared from behind Ron, because Hermione had apparently also come, carrying a leather satchel and looking at the chamber door with the expression she had when something academically significant had just occurred. "The Thackeray precedent," she said. "I looked it up last night. Do you know it's been cited incorrectly in parliamentary legal texts for 60 years? She could have published a correction." "She might still," Harry said. "She should," Hermione said firmly. "It's genuinely important precedent." She looked at Harry. "How do you feel?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always tried to think about honest questions. He felt the bond running at its settled frequency, both Greengrass signatures warm and clear, Daphne's careful and Astoria's bright, and he felt something else, which was the specific sensation of a thing you've been bracing for having finally arrived and been faced and not destroyed you. "Ready," he said. "For what?" Hermione said. "Everything after this," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Then, the Triwizard Tournament is next year." "Yes. You're going to enter." "I don't know if I'll be able to. There's an age restriction." Hermione looked at him with the specific expression she wore when she thought he was being deliberately obtuse. "Harry," she said. "You just faced the Wizengamot at 14 and 1. Do you genuinely believe an age restriction is going to stop you from entering a tournament?" He almost laughed. "I'm not going to break the rules, Hermione." "Of course not," she said. "But the rules have gaps, and some gaps don't require breaking." He looked at her. "I've been reading the tournament charter," she said, with the serenity of someone who had been reading it for 6 months and was waiting to be asked. "The age restriction applies to name submission. It says nothing about magical amplification during tasks." Harry filed that under useful and looked across the corridor at the two people who made amplification possible, who were currently accepting their mother's quiet, thorough check that everyone was uninjured, which was Isadora's version of an embrace. That evening, back at Greengrass Manor for the last night before Hogwarts, they sat in the library again. It was the same library, same fire, same shelves, same long table, but everything about being in it was different, because everything about them was different. They were not 3 children in a workroom with a 3-colored blackboard. They were 3 people who had spent a day being themselves in front of the wizarding world's highest court and had not flinched, and the room had the particular quality of a space that has witnessed something and holds the warmth of it. Astoria had her notebook open, but she wasn't writing. She was looking at the fire. Daphne was reading, which was her decompression method, always had been. When the high-performance state receded, she went to books the way other people went to baths. Harry was thinking about his mother. About Cyrus's description of her in the Wizengamot at 20, going at it offensively, making the other side explain itself. About what it would have meant, growing up with that, with a parent who argued like that, who thought like that. He thought about Sirius, somewhere over the continent on a hippogriff, free and unable to be present, writing letters that arrived via a variety of creative routing that involved at least 2 owls and a trusted intermediary. The letters were warm and funny and had a quality of someone rediscovering what it felt like to be alive after 12 years of being otherwise. Harry kept all of them in the inside pocket of his robe, folded, and they had become a kind of talisman, not for luck but for a specific reminder that things could be righted, even partially, even late. "What are you thinking about?" Astoria said, without looking away from the fire. "My mother," he said. "And Sirius. And what comes next?" "The tournament," Daphne said, not looking up from her book. "Eventually. You're going to enter." "If I can." "You'll find a way," she said. It wasn't flattery. It was the same tone she used for documented facts. Hermione said something similar. Hermione is perceptive. Daphne turned a page. She's going to be important. In whatever comes next. Harry looked at her. "You like her." "I respect her," Daphne said. "Which I prefer to like." "Like is easy. Respect requires evidence." "You have evidence." "The Thackeray precedent," she said, "predates the modern citations by 60 years and the error has been replicated in 7 major legal texts. I found it in the 4th week. Hermione found it independently and mentioned it to me last month." She turned another page. "She found it in the 2nd week." A pause. "I respect her." Harry smiled. "I like her," Astoria said, to the fire. "Both things can be true." "Both things can be true," Daphne agreed. The fire settled. Outside, the coral finch had been replaced by something that sang only in the deep dark of late summer, a lower note, more complex, and Harry listened to it and felt the bond between the three of them as clearly as he felt his own heartbeat. Daphne on his left, reading, with the bone-deep satisfaction of someone who has done difficult work well. Astoria on his right, warm and quiet and present in a way that was different from her usual brightness, something deeper. "Astoria," he said. She looked at him. "Today," he said. "In the chamber. When you stood up, don't," she said. "I'm not going to say anything enormous," he said. He stopped, found the right thing. "You knew exactly when to speak." She held his gaze for a moment, and the firelight was doing something to her expression that made her look older than 14 and also exactly 14, both at once, and she smiled, not the gap-toothed grin, not the fierce smile from the corridor, something quieter than either. "I learned from watching you," she said. He felt that land somewhere specific. Daphne closed her book. They sat like that for a long time, the fire burning down and the manor settling around them with the sounds of an old building comfortable in itself, and Harry thought about the year ahead, the tournament, Voldemort at the end of it in whatever form the resurrection was taking shape toward, the long game that was still in motion. He thought about all of it clearly and without the cold edge of dread, because dread required isolation, and he had not been isolated in 7 years. He thought about what the bond was, what it had become, what Elspeth Greengrass had written in 1692 in 17 lines about a soul of sufficient depth holding two separate bonds without fracturing. He thought about what it meant to not be alone and to have stopped noticing it because the not-aloneness had become simply what he was. "Tomorrow," Daphne said, softly. "Just that." "Tomorrow," Harry agreed. Astoria tucked her feet under her on the chair, settled against the armrest, and closed her eyes. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Harry looked at Daphne. She was looking at Astoria with the expression she wore when she'd stopped managing what her face did, open, certain, the face of someone who knew exactly what they had and had stopped being careful about whether they were allowed to have it. She became aware of Harry looking. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. The fire crackled. The singing in the garden reached its most elaborate variation of the night and held it for a long moment, 3 notes sustained in perfect harmony, and then folded gently into quiet. Chapter 6, The Accord. The goblet of fire was a large wooden cup filled with dancing blue-white flames that smelled like old lightning, and it sat on a stone pedestal in the entrance hall of Hogwarts beneath an age line that Dumbledore had drawn with a single sweep of his wand and that the Weasley twins had crossed approximately 6 hours after the announcement and been ejected from with matching beards. Harry looked at the goblet on the evening of the 3rd day of submission, after dinner, when the entrance hall had emptied and the blue flames moved in the quiet with the particular quality of something that was waiting for the right moment to decide. He wasn't going to put his name in. He'd thought about this carefully and the conclusion was simple: he was 14, the restriction existed for legitimate reasons, and forcing entry by circumventing the age line was the kind of thing that created enemies among people who should remain neutral. He had enough actual enemies. He didn't need manufactured ones. What he had also thought about, carefully, was what Hermione had said on the Ministry corridor. The age restriction applies to name submission. It says nothing about magical amplification during tasks. The goblet would choose its champions on the basis of magical potential and intent. He was not putting his name in. But he was standing in front of it, and the bond was running at the compound frequency because Daphne and Astoria were in the library 40 feet away, and the goblet's flames leaned toward him with the unmistakable inclination of something that was paying attention. He looked at it for a long moment and then walked away. He found out his name had been chosen the next evening. The reaction in the Great Hall when Dumbledore read Harry Potter from the 4th slip of parchment was, depending on where you were sitting, either confirmation of everything people had suspected or proof of something deeply unfair. The Hufflepuffs were angry. Their champion was Cedric Diggory, earnest and capable and genuinely deserving, and the idea that Harry had circumvented the age line felt like theft. The Gryffindors were confused. The Slytherins were calculating. The Durmstrang students looked at Harry with the assessment of professionals encountering an unknown variable. Harry sat with the specific experience of having done nothing and being responsible for its consequences anyway, which was not a new experience for him, and waited. "You didn't put your name in," Ron said, beside him. "No," Harry said. "But your name came out." "Yes." Ron thought about this for a moment. "Someone put it in for you." "Yes," Harry said. "Or something caused the goblet to generate a fourth name. I don't know which yet." "Who would?" Ron stopped. His face did something complicated. "Oh," he said. "Yes," Harry said. The O was the same shape as a plan Harry had been considering since July, since the summer before term, since the moment he'd read about the tournament in an old copy of Hogwarts, a history that Hermione had helpfully dog-eared to the relevant chapter and left on his bed. The tournament ended in a graveyard in the worst version of events. He didn't know the specifics, but he knew the direction, had known it for years with the particular certainty of someone who carries a piece of someone else's obsession in their scar and has learned to read its weather. Voldemort wanted him there. The tournament was a mechanism for getting him there. Harry was going to be there anyway, and now the question was not how to avoid it but how to arrive ready. He looked across the hall at the Slytherin table, where Daphne was watching him with the controlled expression that meant she was 3 steps ahead and waiting for him to catch up. She gave him the smallest nod. He nodded back. Moody, who was not moody, told him to play to his strengths in a conversation after defense that Harry listened to with 2 levels of attention simultaneously, the surface level, which was a student receiving advice from a professor, and the deeper level, which noted every inconsistency in word and manner and filed them for the conversation he was going to have with Daphne that evening. "Whoever got your name in that goblet," Not Moody said, with the particular emphasis of someone enjoying their own performance, "they want you in the tournament. Question is whether you play their game or yours." "Mine," Harry said, without hesitation. Not Moody's magical eye tracked him in a way that was difficult to read. "That's the right answer." "I know," Harry said, and left. He went straight to the library. "Bartemius Crouch Jr., Daphne said. Harry looked at her. "It's the only thing that makes sense." She had 3 books open and her notes spread across the table in the specific pattern she used when she was working through a complex analysis, radiating outward from a central point, like she was mapping territory. "Crouch Sr. is on the tournament committee. He has access to the goblet. His son was convicted as a Death Eater in 1981 and sentenced to Azkaban. The conviction record has an anomaly." She tapped one of the books. "He was remanded into his father's custody rather than served in Azkaban, which is almost unheard of for a Death Eater conviction, and then there are no further records of him at all. He simply stops existing in any documentation." "He's here," Harry said. "He's been here for months," Daphne said. "As Moody. The real Moody is presumably alive somewhere. You don't kill an Auror of his reputation if you can avoid the scrutiny, but incapacitated. Kept somewhere. Crouch Jr. has been teaching defense and planning this since before term started." Astoria came through the stacks with a book and a biscuit and sat down with the quiet intensity she'd been carrying since September. "The third task," she said. "Whatever it is, that's where the plan executes. He needs Harry to reach whatever's at the end." "A port key," Harry said. "Something that looks like a trophy or an obstacle. The winner reaches it, takes it, and it transports them." "To where?" Astoria said. "A graveyard," Harry said. "To a ritual. Something that uses my blood." He said it plainly because plainness was the only productive way to handle it. "Voldemort's been reconstituting for years. Whatever's left of him, it needs a proper body. The ritual his followers are preparing uses blood from an enemy. Specifically mine." The library was quiet. The bond ran between them at the compound frequency, all 3 present, all 3 fully forward, no part of any of them held back from this. "He's not getting it," Astoria said. "Just that. The same way she'd said he's not going to win 3 years ago in Greengrass Manor over legal books." "No," Harry agreed. "He's not. Then we plan, Daphne said, and pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward her. They had 3 months before the third task. The first task was the dragons. Harry had known about the dragons before the champions were formally told, because Not Moody had told him in the way someone tells you a thing when they need you to succeed in order to serve a larger purpose. Harry had gone into the first task with that knowledge and used it, but not in the way Not Moody had suggested. He hadn't summoned his broom and outflown the dragon. He'd done something else. He'd stood in the arena in front of a Hungarian horntail and spoken to it in something that wasn't quite Parseltongue but was adjacent, the same frequency, a deeper register, the part of him that understood the magical nature of creatures from underneath rather than above. He'd spoken to it for 45 seconds while the crowd went entirely, mystified silent, and the horntail had turned its enormous head and looked at him with eyes that were old and not unintelligent, and then it had moved aside and let him take the golden egg. The score from the judges had been confused but unanimous. Full marks. Ron had stared at him for about 30 seconds after. Then, you talked to the dragon. Yes. You talked to the dragon and it just moved. It wasn't doing anything wrong, Harry said. It was protecting its eggs. I acknowledged that and asked if I could pass. And it said yes. It indicated yes, Harry said. Dragons don't technically say things. Ron sat down on the nearest surface and put his face in his hands, in the way he did when Harry did something that exceeded Ron's capacity for immediate contextualization. Harry patted his shoulder and went to find the girls. The second task was underwater. Harry had solved the golden egg clue, a haunting, garbled song when played in open air, clear and terrible when played underwater, and the answer was people held in the lake, people he'd lose if he didn't retrieve them. He'd gone into the lake alone, because the task required individual entry, but he'd surfaced with 4 people rather than 1, his own hostage and 3 others, because he had been incapable of leaving the others there, and the magic of that incapacity had apparently been visible enough to the judges that they'd given him the highest points for moral fiber, which Hermione had read aloud from the scores with the expression of someone who felt vindicated about a long-held position. Cedric had been solid in both tasks. Victor Crumb had been impressive. Fleur Delacour had struggled in the lake due to Grindylows. The points after 2 tasks were close enough that the third task was genuinely consequential. Throughout all of this, Not Moody watched Harry with the attentive investment of someone whose plan was on track. Harry watched Not Moody back. 6 weeks before the third task, Sirius arrived. Not in person, still couldn't, not publicly, not safely, but in the form of a communication that had been routed through enough intermediaries to be untraceable, arriving via a Muggle postal service addressed to Hermione's parents, who forwarded it via a second owl to a drop point Sirius had established in Hogsmeade, and which Harry received in the form of a folded letter tucked into a textbook that appeared on his library chair one Tuesday morning. The letter was 3 pages in Sirius's handwriting, which was large and fast and had the quality of someone who had learned it in better circumstances and was still capable of elegance on good days. It covered a warning about someone at Hogwarts not being who they claimed, which confirmed what Harry already knew. A set of legal notes from a solicitor Sirius had found who specialized in dark artifact law, specifically regarding the soul reconstitution rituals that had been documented in trials after the First War. And a third section that was different from the first 2 in tone, quieter, more personal, that was about Harry's mother. About her work. About what she'd been researching in the year before she died. About the specific nature of the protection she had placed on Harry, which was not standard sacrificial magic, or not only standard sacrificial magic, but something more deliberate, more layered, that she had designed specifically and had been building for months, beginning, Sirius wrote, around the time she became pregnant. Harry read that section 4 times. Then he folded the letter and put it in his inside pocket with the others. He sat with it for the rest of the evening, turning it over with the part of his mind that worked on things quietly, finding the edges of what it meant, that his mother had known, or suspected, or been careful enough to prepare for something she couldn't name but could feel coming. That the protection she'd built had not been improvised at the last second by a woman begging a murderer to spare her child. That it had been built with the same intelligence and intent that Cyrus had described in the Wizengamot chamber. That it was, in some ways, the first deliberately designed piece of magic Harry had ever used. He went to Daphne. He found her in the library, late, the others gone to their dormitories, which was where she often was, the last one still reading, the lights down to 2 candles, the room doing its last hour of the evening thing. He sat across from her and gave her the letter. She read all 3 pages. She was quiet when she finished. "Your mother built the protection into you," she said. "Yes. Deliberately. Over months. She designed it." "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. "She was a research-grade charm specialist. Graduated top of her year, was offered a post at the ministry's experimental division, turned it down. He'd found this out through Sirius's letters over the years, piece by piece. She chose to stay home after I was born. I used to think that was, I don't know, that she'd stopped working. But she wasn't staying home. She was working on me." Daphne looked at him. "The protection has layers," he said. "The love sacrifice layer is the one everyone knows about, the one that deflected the killing curse. But Sirius says there are deeper ones. Ones she built specifically for the scenario where Voldemort came back. Where he tried to use Harry's blood in a ritual." He looked at his right hand. His solicitor found documentation from the First War's trials. When you know whose followers discussed the blood ritual for reconstitution, and they did, in the period before he fell, they had one specific concern. That if they used blood from someone who carried certain protections, the protections would transfer to the reconstituted body. Daphne went very still. She knew about the ritual, Harry said. Or she theorized it. And she built the deepest layer of the protection specifically to address it. "If he takes your blood," Daphne said slowly, "and uses it to reconstitute himself, he carries the protection too," Harry said. "Into the new body. Into the reconstituted form." He held her gaze. "My blood in his veins means my mother's magic in his veins. And my mother built that magic to be specific. Targeted." He paused. "She built it to end him. Not deflect him. End him." The silence that followed was long and had weight, and neither of them tried to fill it. "She sacrificed herself knowing," Daphne said. "Not a question." "I don't know if she knew she would die," Harry said. "I think she knew that if she did, it would matter in a specific way that she could design for." He stopped. "I think she decided that if she was going to give everything, she was going to give it with intent." Daphne looked at him for a long time. The candles were burning low and the library was its deep night self, that most honest version of the room, when the day's noise had gone and what remained was just the bones of the place. "The plan for the 3rd task," she said. "Yes. Has changed." "Yes." She turned to a clean page. "Tell me everything," she said. They worked until 3 in the morning. The maze arrived on a June evening that was warm and golden and felt, in the way of things that are about to become significant, almost aggressively beautiful. The Hogwarts grounds had been transformed, hedges 20 feet high forming a labyrinthine course that no one outside the planning committee could see into, and inside it, according to the briefing, magical obstacles that tested every kind of competency a wizard might need. Harry stood at the entrance to the maze with the other champions, Cedric to his right, Crumb and Fleur behind, and he felt the bond running at its highest sustained frequency since the Wizengamot session. Daphne and Astoria were in the stands, which was 40 feet away and across a crowd, which was close enough. He had told them the plan. He had told Ron and Hermione the plan. He had told Cyrus through a letter that had arrived back with a single line, "I've already spoken to the appropriate people. When it happens, the ministry response will be faster than Voldemort expects." He had told Dumbledore, in the specific way that you tell someone who is capable of acting but prone to working around people rather than with them, directly, specifically, with the documented evidence in hand and Daphne's legal framing around all of it. Dumbledore had looked at him across the headmaster's desk with those blue eyes doing everything they did, and Harry had looked back and said, "You've been preparing me for this for 4 years, Professor. I'd rather you let me prepare myself." Dumbledore had been quiet for a long moment. "You have your mother's eyes," he said, which was what he always said. "And apparently her magical instincts," Harry said. "Which is what matters for this." He'd walked out of the office feeling Dumbledore's gaze on his back the whole way down the spiral staircase, and he'd thought, he'll act. He'll do the right thing because he's fundamentally a good man. He'll just do it in a complicated way. And he'd been at peace with that, because Harry had learned, 7 years into this life, that you couldn't control every variable and that the attempt to do so was more dangerous than accepting that other people would be themselves. The cannon fired. Harry walked into the maze. The first 4 things he encountered were manageable. A blast-ended scrut that he navigated past with wandless air pressure. A section of maze that had been enchanted to disorient by shifting directions, which he solved by listening to the bond. Daphne was to his north, the compound frequency pulling like a compass, and north meant out, and he kept north. A boggart that took the form of something he didn't discuss, which he handled with the particular ferocity of someone who had spent years developing the specific skill of being afraid and moving anyway. A golden mist that reversed spells, which he recognized from a text he'd read in 2nd year and navigated by not casting any. The maze was genuinely difficult. He could feel that Cedric was still moving somewhere in it. He had no bond frequency for Cedric, but there was a sense of active magic to the northeast that had Cedric's quality. He hoped Cedric made it to the center. He liked Cedric. Cedric was the kind of person the tournament had been designed to celebrate, skilled, honorable, excellent without needing to prove it. The Triwizard Cup was in a clearing at the center, and it was golden and ostentatious and humming with portkey magic that Harry could feel from 15 feet away with the same sense he used for everything, the structural sense, the underlying frequency. He stopped. Cedric came through the hedge on the other side of the clearing 40 seconds later, slightly out of breath, with a cut on his forearm and the expression of someone who had just had a deeply eventful 20 minutes. They looked at each other. "You first," Cedric said. "We both know it's a portkey," Harry said. Cedric blinked. "Then, how long have you known?" "Weeks," Harry said. "I didn't enter myself. Someone put my name in because they need me at the destination." He watched Cedric process this. "You should touch it second. Give yourself 3 seconds after I arrive. Come armed and ready." "Armed and ready for what?" "For whatever's there," Harry said. "I don't know the exact shape of it. But it ends tonight, one way or another." Cedric looked at him with the expression of someone who was a 7th year encountering a 4th year who had been in a different war than the one everyone else was in. "All right," he said. "Don't let go of your wand," Harry said. "Whatever happens." He walked to the cup and picked it up. The graveyard was cold and smelled of turned earth and the specific quality of old magic being used for new purposes, that acrid, overworked smell that Isadora had once described as what happens when you use a structure to carry more than it was built for. The headstones were gray in the dark, and the trees were skeletal at the edges, and in the center of the space, near a large stone with the name Riddle carved into it, a cauldron was already lit. And Wormtail was there, moving with the furtive hurrying quality of someone who had been waiting and was relieved and frightened simultaneously, carrying something that Harry looked at and away from because some things required not being named until you were ready to face them. Harry had his wand out before the portkey's pull had fully released him. Wormtail froze. "Peter," Harry said. The name hit the graveyard the way names hit open spaces, traveling, exposing. Pettigrew turned toward him with the hunted expression of a man who had spent 13 years being that expression and had no others left. "You're supposed to be, the plan, I know the plan," Harry said. "The blood ritual. You need my blood in the cauldron and then Voldemort has a body." He held his wand steady and his voice level. "The part your master didn't account for is what my blood carries." Pettigrew's rat-like eyes were moving between Harry and the cauldron and the tree line. "You don't understand what." "I understand exactly what," Harry said. "My mother built something into me. Something specific. And if you put my blood in that cauldron, you put her work into whatever comes out." He kept his eyes on Pettigrew. "I'm not going to stop you." Pettigrew stopped moving. "Think about that," Harry said. "Consider what it means that I came here, that I'm telling you this. I'm not stopping you because I don't need to. The ritual completes. Your master gets his body. And he gets everything in my blood along with it." The graveyard was very quiet. Cedric arrived behind Harry with the sound of displaced air and a wand already lit. He'd come in ready, exactly as asked, and he stood at Harry's shoulder with the same quality Harry had noticed in him from the first task, that uncomplicated courage that didn't require performance. "What's happening?" Cedric said. "The ritual's going to proceed," Harry said, without taking his eyes off Pettigrew. "Stay back and away from the cauldron. Don't touch anyone who emerges." "Harry, trust me," Harry said. Cedric, to his credit, trusted him. Pettigrew was shaking. He was a man who had lived his entire adult life in the service of his own survival, who had made every decision based on what kept him safest, and he was standing in a graveyard with a cauldron and a plan and a 14-year-old who was telling him to proceed, and the shape of the situation didn't fit any category he'd been given. "He'll know," Pettigrew said. "He'll know he'll know when he's in the body," Harry said. "By which point it'll be too late for either of you to do anything about it." He paused. "Unless you'd like to tell me where to find Crouch Jr. instead. Or explain to your master why the ritual didn't happen because you believed a 14-year-old's bluff." Pettigrew's hands were moving before he'd finished the sentence, the compulsion of a man who feared his master more than he trusted any argument, which had always been true of Peter Pettigrew, which was why he was here. The ritual began. What came out of the cauldron was not, immediately, the figure from every nightmare version of this Harry had run through his mind. It was a man, or something man-shaped, and the reconstitution was complete and physical, and Voldemort stood in a graveyard for the first time in 14 years and pulled a robe around himself and turned toward Harry with the cold red eyes that Harry had seen only in a chamber under Hogwarts and in the space behind his own eyelids, and he smiled with the specific pleasure of someone who has just achieved a years-long goal. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. His voice was smooth and cold and had the quality of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted badly enough. Harry looked at him. He felt the bond. Felt both of them, Daphne, sharp and cold and utterly present, 40 miles away in the Hogwarts stands, fully forward in a way he'd never felt before, Astoria, that fierce warm certainty, that thing that was not naivety and had never been naivety, the brightness that had always been strength. He felt them both like a second heartbeat and a third one, all three together at the compound frequency, and the magic that ran through him in that moment was the thing Elspeth Greengrass had written about, not 3 times, not 4 times, something that didn't have a number because it was a different category. "I know what you're carrying," Harry said. Voldemort tilted his head. "Eloquent," he said. "For a child." "My mother's magic," Harry said. "In my blood. In yours now." He held Voldemort's gaze, those red eyes, flat and cold and measuring, and he kept his voice completely level because level was the delivery that would land, not dramatic, not angry. "She built it for this specifically. For the ritual. For what happens after." Something moved in Voldemort's expression. It was not fear. Whatever was left of Tom Riddle that could experience fear had been divided and enclosed and re-enclosed until the capacity was barely accessible, but it was something adjacent. A calculation running faster than usual. "You're lying," Voldemort said. "You can feel it," Harry said. "You've been in the body for 3 minutes. You can feel that there's something wrong with the blood. Something in it that doesn't fit." He paused. "She was a better magical theorist than anyone in your service has been in the last 50 years. She spent a year building this while she was pregnant with me. The protection that saved my life when I was 1 year old was the top layer. The thing that's in your blood right now is the foundation. Voldemort raised his wand. Harry did not raise his. He had not raised it since he arrived in the graveyard. He stood with his arms at his sides and looked at the man who had destroyed his family and had spent 14 years being the shadow of everything bad in Harry's world, and he felt the bond at full pitch, and he felt his mother's work running through his blood, and he felt what the bond had been building toward since a 7-year-old boy had gotten lost from a fountain in Diagon Alley. Avada Kedavra, Voldemort said. The green light crossed the 12 feet between them in the way it always crossed space, absolute, total, designed for ending. It hit Harry. It did not end him. What it did was, interact. The protection in his blood met the curse the way water meets fire, and what happened between them was neither the deflection of that first night in Godric's Hollow nor anything that had a name in any text Harry had read. It was his mother's specific, deliberate, deeply built architecture doing the thing it had been designed to do, not blocking, not absorbing, but redirecting, using the curse's own energy against the body that had cast it, the body that contained her magic in its blood. Voldemort made a sound that was not human and had not been human since Tom Riddle decided to stop being a person and start being a project. The body collapsed. Not gradually. Not dramatically. Simply, it stopped functioning, because the thing inside it had been structurally incompatible with the protection in the blood it carried, because Lily Potter had understood what she was doing and had done it with precision and completeness and the full force of someone who loved her son enough to build something that would last 14 years and deploy at exactly the right moment. The graveyard was very quiet. Wormtail had run. Harry registered that distantly, he'd have to be found, would be found. Cyrus had said the ministry response would be faster than expected. Cedric was behind him, wand still out, breathing hard, alive. Harry stood in the quiet and felt the bond. From Daphne, something that was not relief exactly, something that was beyond relief, on the other side of it, the feeling of a person who has been braced for the worst outcome for months and the worst outcome has not arrived and the absence of it is so complete that it takes a moment to name. Something washing through the careful architecture, through all the managed walls, and for once she wasn't managing it. She let it come. From Astoria, something that was simply warm, that absolute, fundamental warmth that was the bedrock of her, always had been, with an edge of something fierce and bright that was not triumph but was adjacent to it. Something like, I knew it. I always knew it. Harry breathed. He walked to Cedric. All right, he said. Cedric looked at him, then at the collapsed figure by the cauldron, then back at Harry. What just happened? My mother, Harry said. Cedric absorbed this for a moment. She built a trap, Harry said. In my blood. 7 years ago. He paused. 14 years ago. She started building it when I was born. Cedric looked at him with the expression of someone for whom the world had just reconfigured to include a larger version of itself than it had contained this morning. Grab the cup, Harry said. We need to go back. Is he? I don't know, Harry said honestly. The body is gone. What was in it? He's done this before. Survived worse states than this. But the protection is in whatever's left of him now, and it doesn't stop. He looked at the dark. She built it to keep working. Cedric picked up the cup. He looked at Harry once more, with something that was simple and genuine and the kind of thing you only say in the dark after a graveyard. I'm glad it was you, Cedric said. In the maze. In the tournament. Harry looked at him. So am I, he said, and meant it. They touched the cup together. The return hit the Hogwarts grounds with a crack of displaced air, and the crowd's noise went from the general competition murmur to something else entirely within seconds. Dumbledore was already moving, and McGonagall was behind him, and somewhere in the crowd Harry could feel the bond surging toward him with the precise unstoppable quality of two people who had been maintaining distance for 2 hours and had now encountered no reason to maintain it further. Daphne reached him first, which surprised him, she was faster than he expected, moving through the crowd with the focused directness of someone who had shed every layer of careful management and was operating purely on what she actually wanted to do. She stopped a foot from him, looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since they were 12, and she'd decided to stop pretending she wasn't looking, and said, "Show me." He knew what she meant. He pushed up his sleeve. No marks, no damage, no evidence on his skin of anything but a night in a cold graveyard. She took his wrist in both hands and checked with the diagnostic sense the bond gave them, precise as a healer's scan, and when she found nothing wrong, the thing on her face was everything she'd spent 7 years keeping just inside the walls. She let it stay there. He looked at her. This girl who had kissed his cheek on a dare at 9 years old and handed him a cup of tea in the early morning and pulled a 70-year-old legal transcript from a folder in the Waisengamat and kept notes in a notebook on a first night in a leaky cauldron room and been present and careful and brilliant for 7 years and was currently holding his wrist in both hands in the middle of a crowd with everything she felt on her face and not one thing managed. "Daphne," he said. "I know," she said. Astoria hit him from the left with the particular force of someone who had absolutely no patience for extended pauses once the important information had been confirmed. She wrapped both arms around him with the total commitment of a girl who had been warm toward him since the first day and had never seen any reason to moderate it, and Harry held on because she had been right 7 years ago, stuck with each other, for the rest of their probably very interesting lives, and he had never for one day been anything but grateful for it. "I told you," Astoria said, into his shoulder. "You did," he agreed. "You should always listen to me immediately." "Noted." She pulled back and looked at him with those eyes that had been assessing him since she was 7 with the open curiosity of someone who has never found a reason to stop. "She did it," Astoria said. "She did," Harry said. "Your mum." "Yes." Astoria looked at him for a moment with something on her face that was grief and joy at the same time, in the way those things are sometimes genuinely indistinguishable. "She would have liked you," she said. "I think she would have liked all 3 of us." Harry thought about that. He thought about what Cyrus had said and what Sirius had written and what Remus had told him quietly last year about Lily Potter's particular quality, the way she held things, loved things, built things. He thought about a woman who had started building a protection into her unborn son because she looked at the world and saw what was coming and decided that love was not just a feeling but an architecture, something you designed and built and placed where it was needed. He thought about the orasong vine, screaming on a Tuesday afternoon in 1987 when something ancient and fundamental had recognized its moment. "Yes," he said. "I think she would have." Dumbledore confirmed what Harry had said about Crouch Jr. before midnight. The man was found in Moody's office, the polyjuice potion evidence clear and documented. The real Alastor Moody was in a trunk, shaken and furious and immediately attempting to get back to work, which McGonagall described as the most characteristic thing she'd seen all year. Cyrus's ministry contacts moved fast. 3 Death Eaters were taken before morning, people who had been waiting for the resurrection and were instead found waiting for an arrival that wasn't coming. The arrests were quiet and thorough and had the quality of someone who had prepared a response for the fastest possible timeline and executed it precisely. Harry gave his account to Dumbledore and Cornelius Fudge, who was resistant and political and very invested in a narrative that didn't include Voldemort returning and failing in the same evening, but who was ultimately faced with a graveyard and a collapsed ritual circle and Cedric Diggory's independent testimony, and then he gave a second account to Cyrus privately, which was the more complete version. He slept for 12 hours. When he woke, he went to the library. It was a Saturday morning, the week after. The tournament was formally concluded. Cedric had been awarded the Triwizard Cup on the grounds that Harry had been entered without consent and had withdrawn from competition at the maze's conclusion by virtue of circumstances, which was the Dumbledore-managed version of events and one that Harry was fine with because Cedric had genuinely deserved it and the glory was not what he'd been there for. The library was quiet. Summer light came through the tall windows and made rectangles on the floor. The northeast corner table had its usual occupants, Daphne with a book, Astoria with a notebook, both of them present in their different ways. Harry sat down. For a while nobody said anything. The library did its morning thing, the particular sound of an old room in good light, someone shelving books 3 rows over, a quill scritching somewhere in the stacks. What happens now? Astoria said, eventually. The ministry will have to acknowledge what happened eventually, Daphne said, without looking up. Fudge can delay, but he can't indefinitely suppress 4 Death Eater arrests and a documented ritual site. The political situation will shift over the next year. That's not what I meant, Astoria said. Daphne looked up. I meant us, Astoria said. The 3 of us. She looked at Harry with the direct open expression that had never been anything but direct and open in 7 years. What happens now, for us? Harry looked at her. Then at Daphne. Daphne had her book closed. She was looking at him with that expression, the one from the Hogwarts grounds, the one she hadn't managed back down after everything, the one that was just her looking at him the way she actually looked. I'm 16 in August, she said. Astoria's 15 in September. She paused. You're 14 until July. Yes, he said. There is, she stopped. There's time, she said. For all of it. I'm not suggesting, I know, he said. The bond has always been, I know, Daphne. She looked at him. Something in her face was doing the thing it had been doing for 3 years, the thing where she had stopped not feeling it and had not yet decided to say it, and he watched her cross whatever line the graveyard had pushed her to, watched the decision land in her eyes. I don't want to be careful about it anymore, she said. I've been careful about it for 7 years and I've been very good at it and I'm done. She held his gaze with the complete certainty she used for the Wisengamot and the Thackeray transcript and every important thing she'd ever built. I know what this is. I've known for a long time. I just kept curating it. A pause. I'm not curating it anymore. Harry looked at her. Then at Astoria, who was watching both of them with an expression that was fond and a little fierce and entirely unsurprised. You've been waiting for her to say that, he said to Astoria. Since we were 12, she said. I told her. She said I was projecting. She looked at Daphne. Was I projecting? No, Daphne said. You weren't projecting. Excellent, Astoria said, with the serenity of the completely vindicated. Harry looked at his hands on the library table, the hands that had held a basilisk fong and the Triwizard Cup and a 7-year-old's warm cup of tea, that had gone forward into every room that needed going forward into, that had held the bond's magic like water and used it like something he'd always known how to carry. He looked at the 2 of them. At Daphne, who had been building things in careful silence since the moment they met and was now standing, finally, at the thing she'd been building toward, with her walls down and her notes put away and nothing between her and the fact of what she felt. At Astoria, who had been warm toward everything good in her life from the first moment and had never apologized for it and never would. 7 years of mornings with tea and evenings in the library and a workroom with a 3-colored blackboard and arguments about tentacula duty and the orasong vine screaming at the sky. 7 years of the bond running between them like a cord held long enough to stop being separate notes. All right, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. I mean yes, he said. To all of it. To whatever it is. He looked between them, and the bond ran at its full frequency, compound and warm and enormously, quietly certain. I've known for a long time too. I just didn't want to say it before you were ready to hear it. Daphne breathed out. It was the smallest sound, the sound of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally set it down. Astoria, because she was Astoria and had been waiting 7 years to not wait anymore, leaned across the table and kissed his cheek. Left side. He laughed. It came up out of him without permission, warm and real, and Astoria grinned, the gap-toothed grin, back in full force, and Daphne made a sound that was a laugh and a sigh and a long-held breath releasing, all at once. 7 years, Harry said. 7 years, Daphne agreed, and she was smiling the way she smiled when she'd stopped trying to manage it, which was fully and without reservation and aimed directly at him, and it was, he thought, one of the best things he'd ever seen. Outside the library windows, somewhere on the Hogwarts grounds, a bird was singing with the elaborate three-note pattern that Harry had first heard on an early morning in the Cotswolds, standing at the edge of a garden with a cup of tea and the slow dawning understanding that the world was larger and warmer than anything Privet Drive had taught him to expect. The coral finch. Responding to ambient magic. More elaborate the more there was around it. The most elaborate it had ever sounded. Hermione walked into the library at 9:30 with an armful of books and found Harry Potter sitting at a table with two Greengrass sisters, the three of them leaning close, talking with the easy overlapping rhythm of people who have been talking their whole lives, and she stopped, looked, and then walked to a different table and sat down and opened a book and very deliberately did not smile. She smiled anyway. Ron appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, found Hermione smiling at a book, followed her gaze to Harry's table, and said, finally, in the tone of someone who had been waiting for an obvious conclusion to arrive and was enormously relieved it had. "Sit down," Hermione said. "Is there food?" "No." "Can you make something happen with your satchel?" "Sit down, Ron." He sat down. The library settled into its Saturday morning self, the light shifting slowly across the floor, the old building comfortable in the weight of everything it held, and in the northeast corner, three people who had been the Greengrass Accord since they were 7 and 9, and had been a great deal more besides. Harry looked across the table at both of them, at the two halves of everything that had made him certain, that had taken a boy who'd grown up braced against the world and taught him, day by day, that being open was not the same as being vulnerable, that being loved was not something you had to deserve before you could accept it, that having people at your back was not a liability but the thing that made you dangerous in all the ways worth being dangerous. The bond ran between them like a river that had found its bed, easy and full and permanent. Outside, the coral finch held its most complex note for a long, sweet moment. Then it folded into quiet, and the morning continued, and the world, larger and warmer and stranger and more wonderful than anyone had thought to tell Harry Potter it would be, went on.